Hello and welcome to another edition of CPR, Classic Puck Review, brought to you by laymansports.com. I'm your host, Robbie Cameron. With me are my two pals, Michael Beda, our in-house historian, and Derek the Jet Bressette. How's it going, boys?
It's going good. I think this episode's going to be a little bit different, kind of changing it up from our usual format. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to get this debate going.
Yeah, this is a last episode we'll ever do because we won't be friends at the end of it.
Yeah, well, last week.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. It's true.
So
friendships
thanks for
are
bearing with us for a couple months there, everyone.
Yeah. Last week we reviewed one of the greatest final games in maybe all of sports. We had the last game of the Forum between the Leafs and the Habs. How did you guys like reviewing that game? A last-second winner.
That game was great. The Forum went out with a bang, and there was a lot of legendary players in that game, from Doug Gilmour leading the Toronto Maple Leafs. You had Patrick Waugh between the pipes for the Montreal Canadiens, a bunch of other Hall of Famers throughout the lineup, and it was just a fun way to close a chapter on one of the most historic rivalries in the game of hockey.
Yeah, it was great. I was so happy to see Derek's favorite goalie, Felix Potvin, play in that game.
Nice.
It was amazing.
Well, like Derek said, this week we're doing something a little bit different in honor of Michael Beda's top 60 goalies of all time. We figured instead of just judging his list, Derek and I would tag in and make our own top 25 list and kind of judge each other. So this episode we'll be reviewing, discussing, and counting down each other's list. Are you guys prepped and ready to go?
Yeah, I have to say I appreciate you guys making your own list so we can all put it up in comparison. For the last couple months, these guys have been joking with me that they're going to just desecrate my opinions that have slowly been posted on the web. We've had a 4-part series. 3 of them are up as we speak today. The last part should be up in a little bit's time. But it's good that we've kind of been able to come together and explain to you fine folks our personal top 25s rather than a top 60 would take way too long. I started kind of brainstorming ideas to do this article way back, maybe in October of last year, so over half a year ago. And because of COVID, I finally had the time to put all the research to fruition and make the article. So this is something we've joked about debating for many weeks now, and the night has arrived, and I'm very excited to see what you fine fellows have put up in your top 25s.
Are you looking forward to this, Derek?
I definitely am. I feel like Beta made a point to take a shot at my favorite goalie, Felix Potvin, in his intro, and I don't appreciate that. So I'm going to subject him to quite the rant on why Felix Potvin is the greatest goalie of all time tonight.
Beautiful.
There'll be many rants.
So the way we'll do this is we'll each list off 5 goalies and discuss. We'll count down until we, of course, reach the number 1 spots on our list. But before we do that, did you guys have any particular criteria that you made for this list? I know mine's probably going to be a lot different than, say, Beda's and then Derek's. So did you guys have any particular way of counting these guys down or selecting them for your top 25?
For myself, the way I ended up doing it was I just kind of framed it as like, if you asked me who my top 5 goalies of all time were, I came up with, 6 to 8 guys that I think you would put in that top 5. And then the guys that I cut from that, I just shifted down to obviously being in the top 10, and basically kind of just kept working my way down the list in that kind of manner. For myself, I thought that the hardest part of this list was actually coming up with numbers 21 through 25, just because that's actually the point where you have to start cutting guys and that they don't end up being discussed or part of your list. So those decisions were kind of tough for me. I kind of did a little bit of a mixture. I watched some YouTube highlights of a bunch of guys. I watched just to get kind of a feel for like how they played again, especially some of the guys that have been retired for quite some time. And then obviously, I headed on over and to Hockey Reference and just dove through a couple stat archives and, kind of compared numbers between people and eventually slowly kind of arrived at the list. I did my best to not look at other top 25s or top, best goalies of all time lists, just so it would kind of end up, including Betas, just so it would kind of end up being like who I think they are, and kind of just on my own influence there.
What about you, Beta? How'd you
Yeah,
come?
I had no main focal point. I really wanted to make this as broad and encapsulate every different kind of criteria I could when I set out to make this list. So, of course, stats and facts are nice, and they do go a long way in my argument, but it's not necessarily everything that it comes down to. You have to be a winner, you have to be part of a winning team and a winning mentality. You've got to have some sort of influence and innovation over respective other generations. Like an icon where they remembered through these years. Of course, you can't recall who started for the Detroit Cougars in 1928, but you can for the Ottawa Senators in 28, maybe. Like, for example, if they are worth remembering, they've transcended a whole century's worth of memories and inspiration to future goaltenders down the line. It's like a game of telephone. They pass it on to someone who respected their craft in the 40s, then through the 60s, through the 80s, so on and so forth. So innovation, individual accolades, winning mentality, iconic stories, and fun little banter. A balance of eras, kind of. Obviously, some goalies thrived in eras. We're going to talk a lot about how poor the goaltending was in the 80s, but how great it was in the 90s and 50s as well. It was pretty damn good. I also like to focus on what could have been for a few guys. Like, I know Pelle Lindbergh was in my list. He ranked 58th, I believe, off the top of my head. He was very early on in part one. I think I put him 58. Just because he had one fantastic season. He only played a few seasons and then was killed. So that was kind of more of a what could have been, but he was on that trajectory to achieve greatness. And there was only a few of those kind of guys on that list that were more like hypothetical, could have been legendary players. That's why they were buried back in the top 50. And I kind of went over every goalie that had ever started 20 plus games in a single season and had my whole selection pod. And basically it was just mixing and matching each of those criteria. I didn't have an algorithm. I didn't weigh it. I didn't inflate stats to show how they would have been today back in the 20s. I really wanted to put a balance and respect the guys from the 20s because they were the best at that time. I have no right to say someone from the 60s could have done it better than someone in the 20s. We'll never know. So I let the bygones be bygones and spread it all over the map. So one guy might be predominantly based off the stats. Another guy might be because of his influence, even if his stats didn't hold up. It's all about where it kind of ends up down the line for me. That's why it's going to be fun to debate tonight, because we all have our different criteria.
Sure. Yeah. I think for my list, I'm kind of almost the opposite of yours, Beta. Like, I think everyone like previous to the 1940s gets no love on my list. Like, I don't think I have anyone from before the 1940s on my list. So I might shake things up a little bit for you. But yeah, I went heavy into the statistics, advanced analytics, that kind of stuff, all the stuff that you are steadfast against, apparently. And essentially, I looked at the 60s, 70s, 80s, pre-60s, and I just kind of accumulated the top 5 of each decade. And I kind of did what you did and kind of leaned into modern day as well. So some guys are not completely finished. So some guys are still playing, but still, in my opinion, all-time greats, and their numbers will support that. So that's the way I looked at it. I mean, like the 60s and the 50s, mostly it's just the same guys that I was looking at, like the obvious answers like Plot, Sawchuk, those type of guys. They carried over and still dominated to the 60s. So I just thought, is there anyone else from the 50s that I could really try and hammer into this list? Not really. But we'll see. We'll figure it out. We'll probably disagree with a few things. We'll probably laugh at others. And at the end of the day, we'll all cry together. So it'll be a fun time.
It's all in what you put as your greatest, right? Like, if yours is more objective and based off math, so be it. Mine's more subjective about how it was beyond the greater game, and Derek's is somewhere in the middle, and that makes for a hell of a list.
Yeah, I didn't really look into any guys like, and I know that's a big reason for like a lot of people liking the likes of like a Hainsworth or a Vesna, or like putting them so high up, is because of what they did for the sport. But I think if you're talking about the top 25 all time, I think statistics have to play a big factor in it. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that, and we'll kind of flush it out. So, who would like to name their first 5 from their list? We'll let Mr. Beta go last, since he has kind of already had his list prejudged. So, Derek, feel free to take us away here.
Oh yeah, I guess we kind of know who Beda's at least what did yours go up to? You went up to 16 on your articles there, Beta?
Yeah, so as of now, everyone is privy to see my first 3 parts, which discusses 60 all the way down to 16, correct? So they aren't aware of my specific order for my top 15. In fact, like I have over 120 in my original draft. So we could talk about honorable mentions until the cows come home. But yeah, that is correct, Derek. You guys know up to my 16 at least.
I feel like Beta put significantly more hours of preparation into this than we did, Robbie.
Yeah, I think I put in probably about 6-7 hours into this. I think Beta spent months doing that list.
Most of mine was watching YouTube
this.
videos too. And most of those ended up being like goalie fights. And
yeah,
there's some guys, and I'm like, you know what? He could fight. He could fight. All right. Speaking of guys that could fight.
It all started for me, I'll just say, when we had an event at the Resource Center way back in October. Like there was nothing going on. I was supervising the event. There was a meeting in the theater, and I was just kind of sitting at the front desk and thought about this list for the first time 7 months ago. So it wasn't about any anticipation of doing something like this. Like I knew that if I were to ever have it published, there would be some people with contentions and debates, and this will be good. Yeah, Derek, take it away.
All right, so I think we shall. Yeah, all right, I'll start. We're gonna go with number 25, just because Beta took a shot at him and in the opening introduction. So Felix Potvin, 25, 24 Ron Hextall, 23 Tom Barrasso, 22 Mika Kiprasov, and 21 Tiny Thompson.
Nice.
Holy moly.
I'm writing these down along so I can just have a glimmer of what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a strong idea.
Well, I can say everyone but Potvin made my list. Like a couple. You can kind of figure out where I've put them along the way. Hextall and Barrasso I had up near. So I had Barrasso at 32. And then Kiprasov and Thompson are going to be in this top 25 of mine, so I probably will hold off on them for the time being. But Potvin really at 25. Let's hear that.
Yeah, so I think, one of the criteria I think that I kind of went in was just I like you. And as a goalie, just being a fan, as a guy that grew up watching hockey in the 90s and growing up being a Leaf fan, Felix Potvin was the guy back in the day. Obviously, this one's a little bit of an emotional play. He is my favorite goalie, so I am putting him on the list just for fun, basically. There's obviously a difference between the best and my favorite, but I feel like I'm going to just show him some love on this list anyways. I do, though, think that Potvin, meant for him being a great goalie, especially in the realm of the 90s, he kind of burst onto the scene right away. Had an unreal year with the Toronto Maple Leafs in 1992-93, playing 48 games, 25, 15, and 7. He had one of the best goals against averages in the league, and he even garnered Vezina votes in his first year, while the Leafs went on their way to probably the most popular season that they've had in recent memory, the 92-93 playoff run. He was once again stellar in 93-94, and throughout his entire career he played, especially during the portion of his career with the Toronto Maple Leafs, he played constantly over 65 games during those seasons. And during those seasons too, I think what a lot of people kind of forget about the 90s, Toronto Maple Leafs in the 90s anyways, is when it got to the end of the 90s, they kind of sucked. So you have a lot of seasons where Felix at the top of a lot of goaltending categories, but they're kind of more interesting ones too. Like he had in, I have it written down here. So in 1996, he faces the second most shots in the league, only second to Grant Fuhr. Grant Fuhr played a handful more games of him than him. Potvin played 69 games. Grant Fuhr played a little bit less, but Grant Fuhr played a little bit more. He played over 70, but Fuhr still only, even with that discrepancy, he only faced 10 more shots than Potvin. In 1997 is kind of an insane year for him. he just had so many shots that he had to face because the Leafs defense was not the greatest back in those days either. So in the 1997 season, he played 74 games. The Leafs really didn't have another goalie. There was no other option. And he faced 2,438 shots, which was first in the NHL by over 300. The guy that finished third was Curtis Joseph, who played just 2 less games than Potvin and still faced 300 less shots than him. Hasek is somewhere in between both of them. And I just think, he was one of those goalies that maybe the save percentage, maybe the goals against average isn't the highest in the rankings, but there's very few goalies, especially throughout the 1990s, that ended up actually facing more shots than Felix Potvin had.
Yeah, I think my only critique of that would be, I think if I were to rank him of all the goalies in the 90s, like I'd have a hard time putting him in like the top 10 goalies in the 90s. Because you talk about,
But
go ahead.
no, I was just like, the 90s though is, in my opinion, the best era of goaltending, right? So
Right.
it's like seasons where he gets Vezina votes. Obviously, he didn't win the Vezina, but as we're going to kind of go through this list, I'm sure we're going to have a few more guys that, because you played in the 90s, it's just like, dude, come on, man. Good luck winning a Vezina against Hasek, Waugh, Brodeur, Belfour.
Sure.
That's who you got to win Vezinas against. That's who you have to, the individual accolades. I think best era of goaltending that there ever is. And like I said, this one's a little bit more of an emotional play. So I'm not necessarily debating that Potvin 25 or debating that he wouldn't be in the top 10. It's just, you know what? He's my favorite goalie, and I'm putting him on the list because it's my list and I can.
I actually never knew until last week that you liked Potvin so much.
Well, there you go. He's the GOAT, man. And you know what? Just to add on to the argument, coolest looking pads of all time. Stand by that.
Great mask, great pads.
Great
I'll give you
mask
that
too.
for sure.
For my other ones, Hex. Obviously a huge famous moment where he fought Potvin, so there's some fun tie into that.
Potvin, I say, gets the decision.
Potvin definitely gets the decision in that. And for me though, Hextall, obviously again another goalie that really burst on the scene. He won the winning Calder's, Vezinas all kind of in his first year. He won a Conn Smythe in a losing effort in 1987. He, toward the end of his career, he also brought the Flyers back to the Stanley Cup Finals. So he kind of, he was really good at the start of his career, even though the first season that he played was probably the peak of his career. He was a solid goalie throughout. And, I think also just there's a couple things sometimes that it's like, I think doing something really cool can kind of elevate your status as well. And I think obviously, he was a popular goalie. He ended up in a lot of fights, a lot of moments, especially that Flyers fans really love. But he's also the first goalie to score a goal by genuinely shooting the puck the length of the ice, which I think kind of carries a little bit of weight. That's, he's one of those guys that if you guys don't have him on your top 25, I think there's definitely an argument for it. But to me, doing something as cool as being the first goalie to actually, score a goal, and with his numbers being as solid and as good as they are over the course of his career, even though, as we said, that his first year is probably his best, he's still getting Vezina votes late in his career, especially in 96, he was finished 5th in Vezina voting. 97, he takes the Flyers to the Stanley Cup Finals again. So he was solid throughout, but it's just that little extra of him actually being the first guy to score a goal, which I think kind of elevates his status. Tom Barrasso is my one genuine, probably played most of his career in the 80s goalie. Same kind of thing as Hextall. His best seasons might have been when he was a rookie. He won the Calder, Vezina, got a couple Hart votes in there, got a couple Hart votes in his second year as well when he was in Buffalo. He's one of those guys too that although he got some Vezina votes, including later in his year, but again, it's tough winning Vezinas in the 90s when you have guys like Waugh, Hasek, Belfour, Brodeur all mixed in there. But I kind of elevate him once again, just because I think there's few goalies that really epitomize what 80s hockey was all about. And Tom Barrasso is the leading scorer in goalie history with 48 points. So the 80s was not about preventing goals. It was about scoring goals and points. And Barrasso, I think, is the perfect example of 80s hockey because he leads all goalies in points.
Yeah, I mean, like Brasso, he's in my next 5. I have Kiprusoff a little higher. But yeah, I don't have Hextall or Potvin on my list at all. So I mean, like, to each their own, I suppose. My next 5 would be at 25. I have Gump Worsley. Number 24, I have Tom Barrasso. 23, I have your boy Derek Grant Fuhr. At number 22, the one and only, the Flower, Marc-Andre Fleury. And at number 21, Ed Jacquemin. So, I mean,
Well, Robbie,
guys like, go ahead. What were you going to say?
can say that our 25s are congruent. I have the Gumper at 25 myself.
Yeah, so I mean, like, Worsley obviously had a few bad years and with the Rangers, but once he got with the Canadians, he was almost lights out. 2 Vezinas, 4 Cups, just a boss. Barrasso was one of those guys that was kind of like a filler for me in the top 25, just because you have to look at, like you said, Derek, he's got 2 Vezinas, or 1 Vezina rather. He's got a Vezina and he's got 2 Cups. I mean, the guy was.
Yeah, I didn't even touch on his Pittsburgh years really.
Yeah,
I think that's part of his most points things too. Is when you play with Mario and Yager, you're probably going to rack up a couple assists.
Yeah, like he was a stud. I mean, Grant Fuhr, I know it's an unpopular one, but Hall of Famer, 4 Cups. You look in the 80s, and I think to represent the 80s fairly, you have to have a few guys from that decade in your top 25, or at least represented close to, because you have 3. Who are the 3 undisputed goalies of the 80s? You have Grant Fuhr, you have Billy Smith, and Patrick Waugh. Those are really the 3 undisputed best goalies of the 80s. So I think if you don't,
Mike
yeah, absolutely.
Mike Liu, Pete Peters,
Mike Liu,
Lynn, Danielle Bouchard.
But I mean, none of those guys won anything, right?
Okay. So well, I mean, yeah, if you need Grant Fuhr to save the 7th goal and stay at only conceding 6,
but every goalie was saving the 7th goal in the 80s. So that's not really fair. I mean, you're talking about we're talking about his goals against average, 338, not spectacular. His save percentage pretty bad too. But so was Barrasso's. So was Vachon's. Vachon's another guy who was under 90%. I have him in my top 25. But he's a guy that I think favorably.
You were bashing him so much the other week, Rogie Vachon and Kiprusoff, who you are telling me you have high on your list. That's insane.
Right. But you had him in conjunction with other guys. Like, you had him going higher than, like, Price, right?
I can't honor anyone who still plays today. I just can't.
Then that to me doesn't make any sense. So you don't have. Okay, we'll get.
Carey Price will retire right now.
We'll get to that. So Ed Jacquemin. The reason why I have him on is because it was either between him or Cheevers. He's got the Vezina, so he goes in. So the way I broke it down is I tried to get as many guys from each decade in as I possibly could. And Grant Fuhr's a Hall of Famer. He's got 4 Cups. His goalie point share is as good as anyone else's. He's top 25 in my opinion.
Didn't you say at the start of this that you had no goalies from before the 40s, and now you're saying you try to get someone from every decade in?
Yeah, but before the 40s, goalies were trash, and so was the league. Yeah, they were.
Goalies were trash in the 80s too, man.
Yes, they were, but the talent overall in the 80s was so much better, so you can't tell me that.
Okay, but here's my knock on Grant Fuhr. So Grant Fuhr has 1 Vezina in 1988.
I didn't even mention the Vezina.
You didn't mention the Vezina. You don't need to. Here's my argument against him, though. He played games, 88 Oilers. They obviously won the Cup, boatload of wins. His goals against average in that season at 3.43 is 21st in the NHL. His save percentage is 8.81, and that's 26th in the NHL that year.
Fair play.
That's where he falls in the Vezina. Like, the 2 biggest goalie stats that you can have when he won a Vezina, he didn't crack the top 20 in those seasons. That's my argument against Grant.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
Still won it.
He did for some reason.
One more Vezina than Louis, whatever the fuck his name.
One more Vezina than Marc-Andre Fleury.
Exactly, but Fleury's got 200 more wins than he does. So.
Than Grant Fuhr?
Let's take a look at it.
Grant
Grant
Fuhr has
Fury's got
402 wins.
66 more wins. He's got almost 30 more shutouts. His save percentage is almost 40 points higher. His goals against average is almost 70 points lower.
I like Fleury better than Fuhr too, but
here's the thing.
if that's what you're
Well,
basing off
if we're
his
not,
Vezina,
if we're,
where
but
he didn't even deserve a Vezina.
in your opinion, right?
Yeah.
In your opinion. But I mean, in the 80s, guys who didn't win games weren't going to win the Vezina. Just like the Cy Young and pitching, guys who don't win games don't get it. Right? That's just the way it goes.
That's the one
and
thing
that's dumb. That's dumb.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
That's
like,
not my criteria. If a guy has a Vezina and he's in the Hall of Fame, like both of those things matter.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, like if they don't matter, then what are we judging?
Do you think that Marc-Andre Fleury will go to the Hall of Fame?
I think he will. Because here's the reason. Like if we're what's the cutoff of year? Like what is the standard? The guy's got the 6th most wins of all time. He's got like the best in the last 10 years. He's top 3 in every single category. So you're talking about guys like Lundqvist, Rene, Bobrovsky, Fleury. He's got almost as good numbers, if not better than all those guys. So I mean, his goals adjusted, like this era, goals adjusted kind of works in reverse because everything's kind of more inflated now. But I mean, it works out better for goalies from the 80s just because it kind of bogs everything down. So like Fuhr's numbers go from his goals against average is a 3.38. It goes down to a 3.04 goals against adjusted. So however you put stock in that, it is what it is. Like goalies points shared, he's got 128. That's more than like Turk Broda. That's more than Johnny Bauer. Obviously, that's due to longevity, but I mean, it's just like war in baseball. Like if you play longer at a higher level, that should be rewarded. And then who did I had? Yeah, Jacquemin. You just have to put him in there. He's got the Vezina, had a solid career, Hall of Famer. I just think he's the guy there.
Yeah, he was my 35th, so I show a lot of love to Eddie G. Good old boy. It's my turn. Oh shit.
Your turn.
Yeah. So my 25 through 21. So I had the Gumper at 25. You did touch on that quite a little bit, Robbie. More often, he had 17 more games lost than he had wins. He's still like 4th most losses of all time, but he did have a career that extended until he was 45 years old, pretty much. He retired in 1974. Second last professional goaltender to go without a mask, which is pretty blessed. He finally started wearing one in his 22nd and final season at his wife's orders. He played with the miserable Rangers team. Rangers, statistically the worst team in the entire 1950s decade. He faced the most shots per game of any NHL goalie 6 times in a span of 9 years, between 54 to 63, right before he was traded to the Habs. Led the NHL with a .929 save percentage in 1958. Faced the most shots per game of anyone there. He won his 4 Cups in Montreal. That's fantastic. Had a pretty solid combination with Rogie for the last couple. And just from a quirky standpoint as well, like, of course, I mentioned, to be iconic and have some funny stories about you also pertains to this list as being a character and a noble professional. So I love how he was so scared to fly, he wouldn't fly. He had a panic attack. John Ferguson had to like hold him down, strap him to the chair. They were flying to LA and there was some de-icing or something going on. They had to land an emergency in Chicago and he refused to fly. So he took the train the rest of the way. And that's why he went to Minnesota to end his career, is because they're so central to the continent that they were supposed to have the shortest traveling span, less on average quick travel to vast majority of their games. So I love Gumper for that. And the rest of his statistics great as well. 1.98 GAA in undefeated in playoffs, 11 straight wins. Fantastic. My 24th, neither of you guys have mentioned him yet. I don't know if you will down the line. Let me know if you do, but I have Harry Lumley at 24. Apple Cheeks. Shout out to Harry Lumley. 330 wins. And he played predominantly, like he played all throughout the 50s, missed a few years at the end of the late 50s, but he started his career as a 17-year-old, 1943, played 1 game on loan for the Rangers. So he played at least 1 game for every team in the league except the Habs. He played for all original 6 teams but Montreal. From Owen Sound, pretty big goaltender, 6 foot, 195 pounds. Won a cup in 1950, and then Jack Adams sent his ass away to Chicago. struggled in Chicago because they were the worst team in the league in the early 50s, had rejuvenated career with the Leafs for 4 years from 52 to 56. Fantastic numbers, had 13 shutouts in one season, won the Vezina there. First goalie to ever have 300 wins and 300 losses, but that goes towards his longevity there. When he retired, he had played the most amount of games by any goaltender at 804 regular season games. Fairly vicious with his stick in front of the crease, would whack his own teammates. Gordie Howe said he was slashed time and time again by Lumley if he got too close to him. And then he finished his career off with Boston for a couple of years as a savvy vet who kind of guided them to the finals actually in 58, single-handedly almost. So Harry Lumley, good old boy, rest in peace. I did meet him one time really quickly when I was about 3 years old. He died when I was about 4, so I don't really remember it. But he had a Vezina in 54, 2 first-team All-Star appearances, and he had his cup. 71 career shutouts as well, which is fantastic, especially you're playing the bulk of the games in the regular season back then because they seldom dressed a backup goalie. But if you're playing 60-some games out of the 70 and you're able to accumulate 71 shutouts over a 15-year career, that's amazing. 23, my most recent goaltender, I mentioned I don't have any current active goaltenders in my top 25, but Roberto Luongo, who just retired last year, is my 23rd. Do you guys have him in your list? Let me just find out right now.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
I
I have him a lot higher, though. I got him at 15. Yeah, 15.
I have him at 16.
Me and Robbie are on the same page.
Bobby Lou, good old boy. I feel like I could have given him the benefit of the doubt a little bit more, and I feel like as this age or this list ages, I probably will respect some of these more modern guys more down the stretch. Like if guys like Henrik Lundqvist and Carey Price were to retire right now, they would go way further towards the top end of this list. It's just so hard to say. There's no certainty. One of them blows his knee.
How bad do you think Carey Price is going to play in the latter half of his career here?
It's hard to say, man. Nothing is certain.
Like same with Lundqvist. Lundqvist is essentially done now.
Yeah, well, you know what? He's been bum-ass the last couple of years. He's been like a shell of himself. Could have called it and gone out. No, yeah, he is old. But Carey Price is going to be 33 this
Hasek ended his career being a backup.
Yeah.
Well, but he still won the Jennings, though. He still started almost half the games. They just went with the hot hand Osgood in that playoffs. And Dominic was 43.
Because the coach was like, hey, this Osgood guy is better than Hasek right now.
Osgood, I think I put him at 44 or something like that. Like respect
to
Osgood, but
I put him a little bit higher than that.
But yes, Luongo. Enough about Carey Price. Carey Price is on the list, but not in the top 25. Luongo kind of really had a new element to the butterfly style in the late 90s. Really high draft pick for the Islanders. Then they went out and blew it on DiPietro. Please tell me he's not on your list. Traded to Florida in 2000. A couple of his seasons in Florida, like they never made the playoffs, but like unbelievable. Runner-up for the Vezina, 0304, .931 save percentage. So statistically, that's why I have him in there. We got traded to the Canucks, won 47 games in his first season there. First playoff game, they won in a quadruple overtime thriller. And Bobby Lou stood in his head there. 72 saves in a 5-4 win. Has the record, of course, for most wins and shutouts as a Canuck. And that's a 50-year-old franchise. So, and he was there from 06 till 2014 when he got traded back. So in 8 years, that's 17% of the whole franchise. And for him to do what he did is pretty spectacular. Shame they couldn't win a cup with him there in 20. Luongo, that joke. 22, I have.
Timmins classic joke right there.
Classic joke. What time is it, Mr. Mattinen? 22 is my, I would say, only predominantly 80s goaltender. So I have Billy Smith at 22 because he was a winner. Statistically, nothing too impressive here, but he won his Vezina with at the time. What if you were to look up his inflated stats or his average stats, whatever the hell it is, for 1982? Right. I think he had a 2.97 goals against average that year to win the Vezina, which was actually the first year that the Jennings was also in effect. So this was purely a Vezina. But what would his inflated GAA be in 82?
Well, I don't have that specific year, but his career, his goals against average adjusted is 2.69.
Okay.
So it's not that bad.
It's like close to 3 in actuality. Like
3.18.
And he played from 71 till 89. So, of course, the middle of his career is when they were winning those cups in his prime when he was about 30 years old. So couldn't have come at a better time for him. He's got his Vezina. He had a Jennings himself as well the very next year when they four-peated. He had a Jennings that year. He had a Conn Smythe the year that they four-peated too. So that goes a long way too. Conn Smythe is huge. Playoff MVP as a goalie, you know how hot these goalies have to get to, prove their worth in the playoffs and contribute to getting the name on the Stanley Cup. So Billy Smith was a pure winner. He, I would say like a pretty solid majority of his career, believe it or not, he played fewer than the average, than half the games. Like a lot of games, he would only start 35, 36, 37 games and then just get hot in the playoffs. He had pretty good tandem with Chico Resch in the late 70s, early 80s, Rolly Melanson. Then Kelly Rudy started coming in the mid 80s. Basically, by the time he retired, he was the last original Islander from the 72 expansion draft when he retired after 17 years there.
Yeah, considering how long he played, like he only started played in 679 games. So I mean, not that many.
So he is the definition of a money goaltender. All this talk about, he got hot, he's a money goaltender. No, Billy Smith is the true money goaltender, one of the GOAT goalies. Had to show some respect to the 80s. He's the best goalie in the 80s, in my opinion, because he won so much. He almost killed his teammates during practice. Mike Bossy shot at his throat once. Billy Smith almost decapitated him with his stick. You know how aggressive he was. He was like Hextall. I think he's the second most penalized goalie of all time behind Hextall. And he would use that stick. There's the great one to Gretzky when he skates out from behind the net. And first guy I ever met at an event as well was Billy Smith. First event I ever worked, he was there. And I thought that was just how it was there was a Hall of Famer ambassador at every event. Like, it's the greatest job ever. Only one season in his career, he played 50 plus games, believe it or not. But also first goal, like you said, Hextall was the first to shoot the puck. Billy Smith, first to get credit for a goal based off of someone scoring in their own net. That happened in 79. He was the last Islander to touch the puck by redirecting it to the corner. And then my number 21 to round out this fifth of the list is Cujo. Shout out to Curtis Joseph, undrafted. What a great start to his career. St. Louis, played for 6 teams, mind you, but he's won 30-plus games with 5 teams. No one else has ever done that before. So he did that in St. Louis, Edmonton, Toronto, Detroit, and Phoenix. The only team he didn't do that with that he played with was Calgary, where he was Kiprusoff's backup. But even he had a pretty famous moment in Calgary. He only appeared in a few games in the regular season, but replaced Kiprusoff in Game 3 of the first round of the 08 playoffs and actually led them they were down 3-0 and they led them to overtime victory and didn't concede a single goal himself. Pretty blessed. Shout out to Cujo. 454 wins. Only individual accomplishment he has is a King Clancy Award, humanitarian bullshit in 2000. So that kind of pays dividends with what you were saying, Derek, about having to compete with guys like Hasek, Brodeur, Waugh, Belfour in the 90s for Vezinas.
It's hard to win a Vezina.
Yeah.
I'm assuming when we're saying this, like all these guys are probably in our top 10s and stuff.
I
imagine they're close to it.
Phenomenal goaltending exhibited in the 90s. And the fact that he's an undrafted free agent born to single teenage parents, he's a winner in that. And to win almost over 450 regular season games. And still to this day, kids our age think he's the greatest Leaf to ever play. And I wholeheartedly agree. One of the greatest masks. I love his biography. And now what is he? 7th all-time in wins, I guess, now that Fleury and Lundqvist have passed him. Still pretty damn good. 2.53 GAA in the playoffs all-time, 63 playoff wins, is the most for any goalie without a Stanley Cup. Shout out to Cujo.
All right, Derek, you're up again.
Oh, man, back to me. Eh? All right, so number 20, I have George Hainsworth. Beda's happy about that. Got to show some love to the guys from the 20s.
Yeah, man, 20s best goaltending decade. Robbie, fuck you.
Well, I mean, hey, when you can't pass the puck forward, it makes it a lot better to make it easier to make a save. So,
right, man.
Anyways, yeah, George Hainsworth. I guess the one big claim to fame that he has, he's the first goalie to actually win the Vezina Trophy, regardless of the incarnation that it actually is. He won the first 3. Than a couple other guys like Tiny Thompson and Frank Brimsek. So Tiny Thompson, too, that I mentioned earlier. One of the cool things that he did was that he was the first guy to really utilize a glove save on a frequent basis. So that's a really cool innovation that he had. Anyways, moving on. Number 19, you guys are going to probably rip this one, too. Chris Osgood. Number 18, Cujo. Number 17, Henrik Lundqvist. And then number 16, Johnny Bauer.
Oh. Bauer this high, eh?
Do you feel like that's that high for
I
Bauer?
respect it. I
Yeah,
respect it.
that's where did you have Bauer, Robbie?
I have him at 10.
Oh, you
Oh,
meant
when
like
you said
high.
high, okay,
I thought
okay.
you meant this high, like.
Like, wow, he's
Oh,
that good? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I thought when you said he's that high, I thought you were like
Mm.
you would have him like 30 or something.
so explain. So I don't have Cujo on my list at all.
Okay.
So I know, Beta, you kind of touched on it. Explain Osgood, because I'm never gonna understand Hainsworth. So don't even bother explaining that to me. Just go straight to Osgood.
Yeah. So
I'm curious about this too, because Chris Osgood, like like I'm sure you can convince me, because I'm quite baffled by this, because no one ever fucking wanted him. All his years in Detroit,
Hey,
expendable. No one
Detroit
ever wanted
got
him.
him
Like
back.
guys like Legacy, Joseph, Hasek, trade him off to the Islanders, trade him off to the Blues. He comes back. Oh, like Mike Vernon was there in the '90s. Now we got Hasek. Now sit your ass on the bench. It wasn't until Hasek's last year that he finally unseated him and kind of got some respect.
To be fair, his years in the Islanders, he was pretty good.
He
Like,
was a
For a
solid
year and a
Islanders.
half.
The Islanders just weren't a good team though at that point in time. So yeah, to kind of defend, I guess, my defense of Osgood, George Hainsworth, I respect that Robbie doesn't know much about him because that involves like looking up
reading.
history books and things
Dude,
like that.
you look at his
Uh,
numbers. His numbers, when I know you guys don't want to hear that shit. His goals against average adjusted, everything that's adjusted today's modern. I don't want to hear that shit. So I'm not even
No.
going to say it. I'm not going to waste my breath. Do you?
all right. So George Hainsworth. Anyways, Chris Osgood, I feel like is kind of. I think Osgood is just like kind of on par with Cujo. It's just Cujo has the slightly better numbers, but Osgood actually ended up with something in his trophy case. Obviously, he had a couple Jennings. Part of that was genuinely split with Dominic Hasek as they played. Yeah, Osgood played 43 games that year in 2008 when they won the Jennings. I think and then 46 the next year when Detroit. So I think Osgood kind of played slightly more than Hasek, but it's still kind of a 1A, 1B thing. But Babcock at that time was still giving an edge to Osgood. And I think go back to early days in his career, he backstopped the Detroit Red Wings to one of the greatest regular seasons of all time. He was the genuine starting goalie in 1996. He had the record of 39-6-5 that year, which is outstanding, even though, as Robbie kind of touched on, wins and losses aren't the be-all and end-all when it comes to goaltending. But he also won the Jennings that year. He finished second in Vezina voting that year as well. He just constantly, let me take a look here. We have, like 3, 4, like he has constantly hitting 31 win seasons during the 90s. They're kind of broken up a little bit. So, but
Was that him or was that the Red Wings though? Like that's all-star team.
You can argue that with every goalie though. Like you're putting Grant Fuhr on this list.
Yeah,
too,
and that's
right?
exactly.
And it's like, is that him, or is it the fact that the Oilers can score 8 goals a game?
But here's the difference: Grant Fuhr has a Vezina. Osgood has nothing.
Osgood has Jennings.
Osgood has 2 Jennings.
Jennings, but
so he's got a Vezina in 19 he finished second in Vezina voting in 96, losing to Jim Carrey in 96. So, I've been saying that it's tough to win Vezinas against like Waugh, Brodeur, Belfour and stuff, but he ended up
second-team All-Star the year of the great 62 win season as well.
He was a second-team All-Star. He's got a lot of. The one thing that I think is the knock on Osgood is the argument that Robbie kind of jumped to. It's like how much of it's him and how much of it is just the Red Wings are really good. And I think sometimes, he has 3 cups total, 2 of them as the starter, especially when you consider the playoff starting appearances. And I think, he led the way on the run to the cup in 2009 as well, that ultimately fell short to Pittsburgh. And part of me kind of thinks that if somehow Detroit managed to win that series against Pittsburgh in 2009, win that final game, I think people would think way more highly of Chris Osgood than what he does. And I feel like there might be nobody in hockey history whose memory or his legacy has been so affected by just losing one game.
I don't know.
Still think he was kind of bum ass.
He's the pinnacle of always a bridesmaid, never a bride type of guy.
Yeah.
Just
Expendable is the one word I'll always associate with this guy. Will he be in the Hall of Fame? No. Why is he the top 20 on your list? What is he, fucking 19th? Guy will never see the Hall of Fame.
No, yeah.
He may not. He may not. But he was still the goalie of probably the best team that we've all been alive to actually see.
Nah, I think the 0-2 Red Wings were the truth.
The 0-2 Red Wings are the true best team, but he was like, yeah, the 1 year that Osgood was gone is probably more accurate. But I mean, we're gonna go like to Fleury and stuff. It's like obviously Fleury has some better numbers and stuff, but he's got his cup runs too with Pittsburgh or whatever. Like he backed up Murray during the playoffs and that.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, so it's like he
also led an expansion team to the Cup Finals the very next year. So please.
And then
Paper
lost.
Tigers.
So what? The expansion team was never supposed to be there. The Red Wings were always supposed to be there.
Same amount of finals as Fleury. You just go with, but that's the thing. See, that's the argument though. So you're saying that Chris Osgood getting the finals with Detroit isn't as impressive as a Fleury getting to the finals with Vegas because Detroit is Detroit and they're supposed to go to the finals, but Vegas was supposed to be trash. And that's the difference. So I think Osgood to me has just always been that guy that's like everybody, as you kind of go, it's like maybe he's expendable or whatever because his team was great, but he was the goalie on that team and he was solid the entire way.
I have Osgood 2 places higher than Fleury, but if Fleury to retire right now, Osgood would just slip into oblivion. Fleury is amazing. Like I love Fleury, Robbie. He would probably jostle in the top 30, maybe even top 25 for me if you were to retire right now. There's no telling.
Dude,
but
Marc-Andre Fleury, man, like super underrated. He doesn't
Chris
have
Osgood, man, in your top 20. Goodness gracious.
Yeah, that's a tough one. But hey, your list. It's your list.
It is.
He's a nice man.
He's a nice guy. All right. Shall I take? Did you say all of yours? Johnny Bower. Why is he so high? Why is he so low? I guess 16.
I mean, I don't know. Like you think that's low? I'm curious as to why. Like why you think he's a top 10 goalie of all time?
I just have always associated Johnny Bower with like top 10 all the time. Like I've never had a discussion on Johnny Bower with a lot.
I mean, I think to me, it's like
every list that I see, every time that I hear Johnny Bower's name, it's always associated with like top 10 territory. But I mean, I guess we'll see who's above him. So maybe I'm judging too soon.
Yeah, like I think a large part of it goes back to the same thing. He won a lot of cups that he also split the net with Sawchuk. Sawchuk's career without Bauer, I think, is better than Bauer's career without Sawchuk at that point as well. Obviously, Bauer is a great goalie in his own right. I think I think he even gets a little bit of a bump just because he's probably one of the most popular players of all time. And even
he's got what, 4 cups?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think even now, like if you have a 10-year-old Leaf fan, they know who Johnny Bower is, right? Whereas it's like they might not know who Sawchuk is, but I think ultimately at the end of the day, if you also compare them to the other goalies that played in the 50s and 60s, and I have a handful of them that are higher up on the list, it's just I think it's not really it's a knock. I think it's just 16 is where he kind of fits in.
And I think we kind of have a tendency to romanticize older generation players, like someone we've heard stories about growing up. Mm-hmm. We just always assume that they were better than maybe the guys who just are still playing now or played 20 years ago, just because of the legendary stories we hear of them. So maybe that's a key. But to Beda's point, I mean, his legacy, I think, stands a lot taller than an Osgood or a Cujo. And, no offense to those guys, but like, I mean, Osgood is he remembered as an all-time great even in Detroit? I don't think so, but that's just one man's opinion.
I'm kind of like I'm not disagreeing or agreeing necessarily. Like I can say I think 16 is a very healthy place for Johnny Bower to be. I myself have him at 19, so almost the same thing. Remember I said at the beginning of this chat, like if we're within 4 of each other and we're seeing eye to eye, that's great. So like 16 is great. To beat 10, like that's hard to say. Like I'd love to hear your list along the way to see how he fits into that piece. But yes, Johnny Bower, like you do romanticize people that kind of tell you tales about them, right? So if your parents are Leaf fans and they tell you, oh, the days when I was 9, 10, Johnny Bower is the guy, like look up his stats, look up his highlights. He was wicked. The fact that he lived so long in this kind of era where his funeral was all over social media and you won't get that with guys like Turk Broda, who in my opinion, and I'll get to that, is the greatest Leaf goalie of all time. Johnny Bower a close second, but Johnny Bower is going to be highly touted as he's more synonymous with like a slight generation of that last tick of success that the Leafs had in the 60s. Johnny Bower was the starter for the early 60s portion when Sawchuk came in and actually won them the cup. Like Sawchuk was in net when they won the cup in 67, but Johnny Bower was there on the team, and just what he stood for, like he was a great dude, like just always a community person, like he was a hero. He is a hero, and it's like when you're a kid and your heroes are like 10 feet tall and they skate like lightning quick and hit like ridiculously hard, right? Like I always put Scott Stevens as like God to me, because when I was 6, I'm like, he's in the news all the time. He's making these plays, making these hits, he's winning the cup. Like you just idolize your heroes. Like Michael Jordan was like my hero just because he was the best of his time and I didn't know anything about him as a person. But with Johnny, he was a hero as a person, and he was a pretty damn good goalie too. So I understand that for sure. So I guess that's my take on Johnny. Like I had him at 19, almost the same thing as 16, whatever. Flip.
I mean, I have him at 10 because his save percentage is godlike. I mean, the only guys who are close to him are Hasek and Dryden. I think, what is it? Plant is like 0.02 behind him. He's got 250 wins, 4 cups, 2 Vezinas, lasting legacy. That's kind of why I have him so high. It's just because I have a hard time fitting the guys that I have coming up ahead of him. That's kind of my rationale behind it. But yeah, I mean, I'm not fast.
His fourth Vezina, he only played 34 games in the regular season. That was split between he and Sawchuk. It was Sawchuk's Vezina.
Yeah. And you're right. Like back then, it was a completely different rationale, right? So,
I think back then, for like if you want the Vezina, you kind of go with the first All-Star team goalie is probably the true Vezina Trophy winner, because they still did vote on All-Star teams, and the All-Star team goalie is the guy that the media felt was the best goalie that year, which would be the criteria that the Vezina would fall under.
Roger Crozier and Charlie Hodge were the number 1 and 2 goalies in that All-Star season. Neither Sawchuk nor Bauer, because they're like, we can't honor him because each of them, like Sawchuk played 41 games and Bauer played 34, and then Bruce Gamble got a couple extra bitch-ass games. Yeah. Roger Crozier was the last goalie to ever start all 70 games that particular season, and he played pretty well as well. Charlie Hodge inexplicably started over Gump Worsley that year for Montreal. That's another story. Charlie Hodge isn't even on my list anywhere close. But yeah, it's interesting to talk about where guys line up on all-star teams in relation to winning Vezinas, or what would be the equivalent of the Jennings. Because yeah, Johnny Bower, like Robbie, I'm not arguing with you to say he shouldn't be that high at 10, but we romanticize his Vezina wins to put him on a pedestal, but his fourth and final Vezina, he had little to do with it.
Did he have 4? I thought he only had 2.
Sorry, his second, yeah, my mistake. 4 cups, 2 Vezinas. But yeah, exactly. He had 2 Vezinas, and one of them was legit, and the other one was mostly Sawchuk.
I'll concede that one then, boys.
But he's still a great dude. He's my favorite Leaf goalie.
Yeah, I was just wondering because maybe there was just a little bit of a difference in the way we kind of judged older guys. But I guess you're right. I mean, like, yeah, back then, like, you have so many Hall of Fame goalies on the same team. It's just kind of like, what do you give the nod to if that team wins the Vezina? Because essentially that's what it was. The team wins the Vezina, although the goalies get the credit. So, I mean, fair play.
That's the thing about Ken Dryden, right? Like, he conceded the fewest amount of goals and won the Vezina because he had a wicked team in front of him. And I'm never going to say, like, oh, like, if Ken Dryden played for the Kansas City Scouts, like, how would that go, right? But there's some guys that may have been, like, the most talented goalies. Like, a lot of people in interviews I've seen vouch that Charlie Rayner was the best goalie in the league in the early 50s, and he played with the worst team, the Rangers. So he won a Hart Trophy. They showed him love because they're like, yeah, this guy is the most valuable player. But he'll never win a Vezina because he's conceding more goals.
Right.
And it sucks. But mind you, like, I like what you said about it, because, like, yeah, this whole notion of romanticizing players, that's probably why I have so many players from the 20s and 30s high up on the list, because I can only imagine how wicked it would have been to play back then, and we have to keep their legacy kind of relevant a little bit. We have to understand the game back then, and I'll never like discredit players no matter when they played. So I romanticize have limited footage and access of information on.
Absolutely. Right. So for my next 5, what do we go to? We go till 16. I have Rogie Vachon at 20. I have Mika Kiprasov. This is getting very modern, these next few ones. I have Mika Kiprasov at 19. Pekka Rinne at 18. Carey Price at 17. And Roberto Luongo at 16.
You have Price at 17.
I have Price at 17, yeah.
Wow.
He's the only one where I'm kind of like, I'm really iffy. But that heart,
See, that's why I have him a lot higher, and a lot of it was because of that heart.
See,
and the 2015
is like,
season in total.
My thing is this, is like he's got roughly the same amount of games as Rinne, and like you can judge this against the teams, but Rinne's got better numbers, got more wins, less losses, more shutouts, higher, the exact same save percentage actually, and then a better goals against average. Even era-adjusted goals against average, it's much better. I mean,
you don't need era-adjusted to compare Price and Rinne. They play in the same.
Well, that's what
era.
I mean, but like the different categories I'm trying to expand on. But like, yeah, Price has got the heart, but I mean, he hasn't really won anything. Like besides the heart, besides that year, I don't think he has another Vezina, right? He's got the one Vezina, and that's it.
It's not. I think
he's
like
been
Bobrovsky. I think Bobrovsky is like the only guy has like 2 Vezinas in a while, though.
Yeah. So like the last 15 years, the way I judge those last couple of guys, like I almost had Nabokov on this list just because his numbers are so good. But Kiprasov has the Vezina, so he's got to be considered. And you got to show love to the guys from the last 15 years. Like there's no way you can't. Like a full decade has gone by. We've seen how this era plays hockey. We know how good these goalies are. We know their numbers and what they're roughly going to shape out to be. Like Luongo at 16. And I wanted to put him higher. And then like in hindsight with the Johnny Bauer discussion, maybe I could have, but I couldn't put him higher. And then Beda, I know you've already mentioned you have Billy Smith already gone. I had Billy Smith at 15. I couldn't put him past Billy Smith because Smith's got all those cups. He's got a Smythe. He's got a Vezina too, right? So I think just the amount of hardware he has. And Luongo doesn't have a Vezina. Like that's the most shocking thing of all is he doesn't have a Vezina at all. But the reason why I ranked him so high, and because like Kiprasov's got a Vezina, Rinne's got a Vezina, Price got a Vezina. The reason why I have Luongo ahead of all those guys is because over 1,000 games played. That's ridiculous. But also goalie points shared. So basically WAR, wins above replacement for goalies. He's the all-time leader. So he's been the most consistent, highest caliber goalie, arguably for the longest. So he's got to be that high. If he won a Vezina, or he had won a cup, he doesn't have either. I think
know what the kind of the funny thing about Luongo not having a Vezina? So in 2006, 2007, he finished second in Vezina voting to Martin Brodeur. Trophy voting. Luongo got more votes than Brodeur. Crosby ultimately won the Hart Trophy. But so that's one of those things that it's like maybe he should have one because I don't know, like that's kind of just a confusing way to vote for that. If you were one of the writers that got to do that, it's like, you think Brodeur is the best goalie, but then Luongo gets more Hart votes somehow. Yeah. It's bizarre.
Yeah, like I just think like he's such a good goalie for so long. He's got so many memorable games. Like he held up, like he propped up Florida in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Like he was just so good.
He was a captain at one point in his career as well.
I just wish he had won something. Like he's got a Jennings. Like he's got
no,
it doesn't even have that.
Yeah, so I mean, like, what can you do? Like
I think, the only thing he's really won, I guess, would be a gold medal. And this is obviously, we're counting down the top 25 NHL goalies. So bringing in international accolades doesn't really make sense. But
like if
77 shutouts though, that's a high load of shutouts. Yeah.
Like you're talking about Kiprasov only had 44, Rinne had 58, Price has 48. Luongo 77, but Luongo's also got 400 more games than those guys. But that's not a knock. Like, that's something to be marveled at in today's game. Like, no one plays
Yeah,
that amount of goal anymore.
Yeah, he's got the third most wins of all time too.
Yeah, like, it's ridiculous. I think if he had, like I said, if he had something, he would. And if we were counting like international play, he would be top 10.
He might be. Yeah, he's top 10 in shutouts as well.
Yeah. But yeah, like I said, like Rogie Vachon, I'm not going to make too much of an argument for. I think he was just part of some great Habs teams. He came in, and listening to Beda talk about him in our Miracle on Manchester segment we did a few weeks back kind of swayed me a little bit, looking up his numbers, looking at how good he was in the 70s compared to the other guys. I think he belongs. He's got wins. He's got losses. His save percentage holds up. His goals against average holds up.
I'm fired up to hear that, man. That's amazing. I'm glad you like Rogie. Hall of Famer.
Yeah, Hall of Famer as well, man. Like, as much as we can say, like, all these guys, like, I would say Price a Hall of Famer. I would say Renee's a Hall of Famer. Kiprasov, he's getting close to that. I don't know why they haven't given him more love, but I think he's a borderline Hall of Famer as well. But those are just the top guys from this era. Like, you just have to give them some credit. But yeah, I mean, Luongo headlines the class. But there's another guy from this era that's above him. So we'll see who that is.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's so hard to say what kind of goalies will get in, right? Because have there been 34 goalies that played in the NHL that are in the Hall of Fame, right? And lately, the ones that have been in, aside from Rogie waiting 35 years to get in after he retired, it's been like the GOATs that we're going to get to. You're going to have to maybe tell me a little bit more about Rene, of why he's ranked, 17th, 18th on your list? Like,
Yeah,
I can't believe that.
Where did you have Rene, Beta? Did you even have him?
No, he's like fucking 80th.
Which is kind of weird for me because he's got a Vezina. Where do you have Kiprasov?
I have Kiprasov at 20.
20, and he's got better numbers all across the board. So
yeah, but he's played way longer. Kiprasov only played.
Buddy, he's only played 30 more games.
That's okay.
He's got 30 more wins.
Because he was not starting the first portion of his career. Neither was Kiprasov, for that matter, in San Jose.
I don't see how that's a knock against either one. Like, Rene still has better numbers.
Yeah, but Kiprasov was actually playing 70-plus games in those seasons.
That's just the era that Rene's playing, and no guy plays that anymore.
It's pretty much the same era, like 10 years ago and today.
Does anyone play 70 games nowadays?
No, but that's the point. What is this load
people
management
didn't play
nonsense?
70 games. People didn't play 70 games when Kiprasov was playing, though, either.
Yeah.
Kiprasov's stages of that, though.
Yeah, Kiprasov's like 70-plus game seasons were an anomaly.
But like even so, boys, like he's got 30 more games, he's got more wins, he's got less losses, more shutouts, higher save percentage, lower goals against average, more. He's got a Vezina, he's got everything Kiprasov has, and he's got more All-Star appearances as well. So I mean, like, if Kiprasov is that high, Rene's that high as well.
He has potential to, like, if he were to call it a career now, he'd be on my list. He'd be top 50 for sure, maybe even top 40. I'm kind of baffled, though, because guys like Vachon and Kiprasov and someone else that I mentioned weeks ago, you couldn't believe that I had him this high. Kiprasov, for a fact, when I told him I had him 20, you were, like, astonished.
Yeah, because you had Carey Price so low.
31, whatever. He was the highest of any active goalie.
But then you had Kiprasov, like, what? Almost 16 slots ahead of him. What? 11, pardon me. Which...
I would rank Carey Price higher than Kiprasov too.
Yeah, so I mean, like,
which I have done.
That's just my spiel. Like, yeah. I know it's my unique thing. I just can't play this what if game with guys that still have years ahead of them. You know, like it'll kill me if Carey Price leaves Montreal and becomes one of those guys who kind of hops around from team to team because he's just winding down. And sure, he might have a couple good years, but he was on the trade block. He could have actually been traded for Fleury this year, right? They were talking Price for Fleury. Get the Flower in Montreal, Price going to Vegas. I'd be like, fuck off. Anyway, Kiprasov, both you guys have said enough about him. I don't need to say too much more, but yeah, like, have him at 20. Were you done, by the way, Robbie? Or
yeah, go ahead.
Johnny as well. Not too much to say about Johnny. Had him at 19. I do put him on that pedestal, though, romanticizing. That's my favorite thing you said tonight, Robbie, talking about this, because we really do hold these heroes that we're taught. Our forefathers teach us about these legends. and we accentuate it to godlike status. And Johnny is a god. He's a Leaf legend, one of the finest Leafs to ever play. 19, I think, is pretty generous. I don't think he should be anywhere lower than 25th, but I don't think he should be any higher than 15. He fits between that 15 to 25 slot, which we all have him at, except for you, Robbie, at 10. But you know what? Respect to Johnny, because he's a great guy. And the fact that he didn't really make his debut until that year with the Rangers, and then was sent down to the minors. So that might be a little bit held against him, is that he couldn't play when he was young and vibrant and shape, like 20. He fought in the war as a minor. He was conditioned to play in the league, but he just wasn't one of the 6 best goalies during the original 6 through his 20s. He got a chance with New York and was sent down. Maybe made a couple of relief appearances for Worsley. So the fact that we have him ahead of Worsley, even though he was inferior to him in New York size in the 50s, and then when the Leafs wanted him in 58, he was already almost 34 years old. And then Leaf legend for his 12 years that he was there. 4 cups, 2 Vezinas, as you said. My 18, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, if you have Charlie Gardner in your list. Charlie Gardner, Chicago Blackhawks, late 20s through the mid-30s, only played 7 years in the league. Scottish-born, right-handed catcher. The first year that they ever did NHL All-Star teams, he was on it in 1931. I believe he was on the second team or the first team. Let's see. He was on the first team. So he was 3-time first-team All-Star, one-time second-team All-Star. So 31, 32, 33, 34, made 4 straight All-Star team appearances. Of any goalie who's played more than 25 games in their career, he's 3rd all-time in goals against average, 2.02 goals against average in his career. The first few years he played with the Blackhawks, so half his career, the first half, they're cellar dwellers. In fact, 1928-29, I talk a lot about it in the article, it's called the year of the shutout, because it was the last year that they were prohibited from passing the puck forward. Therefore, goal scoring was really, really low. That year specifically, goalies were figuring it out. They were the best they were at that time. Then they're like, holy shit, we need to allow some more offensive play to make goal scoring more frequent. And sure enough, it helped a little bit. But Chicago in 28-29, 44-game season, do you know how many goals they scored in 44 games as a team? Let's just guess.
37.
Okay.
The Chicago Blackhawks in which year?
Don't look it up.
I'm not looking it up. I'm not looking up. I'm just asking to clarify.
28-29. It's called the year of the
20.
shutout. I classify it as.
They scored 22 goals.
Okay, 33. So Robbie was slightly closer. But yeah, 30. So that's 3/4 of a goal a game his team scored. And that season, it wasn't like a phenomenal season because he didn't make the All-Star team in those seasons. It was his second year in the league. And I want to see how many games. I think he only won like 8 games, but they're absolute steals because no one knew what they were doing. If you type Charlie Gardner, he goes by Chuck as well. I guess it's the same name. But yeah, Scottish-born right-handed catcher. There he is. So that season, the year of the shutout, he had 5 shutouts for 1.85, and he was 7-29-8. And then he flipped the switch, started leading the Blackhawks, single-handedly to the Cup Finals. They lost in 31. He would eventually win the first Cup in franchise history in 34. 42 shutouts in 6 seasons. He had a 12 shutout performance in 1930-31, 10 shutouts in 33-34. By now, offensive flow is going quite well. 3 times he won over 20 games, and back in the day, they were only playing 44 to 48 games a year. What else do I got on him? 1.73 GAA in 1931. It's the first year he was an All-Star. New York Americans offered him one of the most lucrative deals. He turned it down and said, I want to stay in Chicago. In the 1934 playoffs, Chicago won the Cup. He had a 1.33 goals against average throughout the playoffs. Little did he know he was fighting a really bad tonsil infection that caused him to faint in the dressing room. He was slumping over the crossbar between whistles, couldn't stand up, told people he was fine. He played on, blood pouring out of his mouth. But when they lifted the cup, he goes on a singing lesson in the summer and suffers a brain hemorrhage and dies at the age of 29, one of the forgotten heroes of our game. First class of inducted members into the Hall of Fame in 45. Charlie Gardner was one of them, with George Vezina, the only 2 goaltenders from the NHL era. So forgotten hero, legend, kind of, if his numbers don't impress you because of the year he played, so be it. I coupled that with kind of his iconic legacy of importance to the game being, and he was also the captain of the team as well. he captained the Blackhawks to the 34 Cup. So he was the first captain as a goaltender to lead his team to the Cup, and he won a couple of Vezinas as well. He won 2 Vezinas.
Would he be the only goalie captain to win a cup? I can't imagine there was too many other teams.
Well,
that
Bill
had
Durnan
that.
kind of did as well. Bill Durnan with the Habs.
What do you mean by kind of did? Like
some games he'd wear the C, some games he wouldn't. The year he predominantly wore the C, they didn't win the Cup. So I think Charlie Gardner is the only full season captain to actually go through and win the Cup. Yeah, that's right.
Was Luongo the captain in 2011 still?
No, he had just given it up.
Just given it up. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess I was just thinking that he would have, I guess, got close, but
he only missed 4 games in 6 seasons after he had solidified himself in the starting lineup. So yeah, Charlie Gardner, pretty interesting to look up. My main source of research was this one book I have that you saw the one time you guys came over, called Without Fear. It came out in 2002, and it was a list of top 50 goaltenders for various criteria. So of course it's quite out of date because it's a couple decades old. They have Brodeur at 21 because he was only in the middle of his career, quite frankly. But Charlie Gardner, I think they had him at 18 in that list. He's 18 in my list. And he should not be forgotten. 17, another really old guy. I'm not sure if you guys have him, but I have Alec Connell, Ottawa Senators, Montreal Maroons from the mid-20s through the late 30s. Let me tell you a little about him. The Ottawa Fireman, 5'9", 150 pounds, joined the Senators organization right after they traded Clint Benedict to the Maroons in 1924. One of the first goalies to record a 30-win season. Actually, he was the first in 1926-27, first goalie to win 30 games in a season. That was the last time the Senators ever won a cup. He won the cup with them. His name's on the cup. Shout out to Alec Connell. 1927-28, his 4th season, he set what is still the longest shutout streak in NHL history, the equivalent of 6.5 games, almost a whole month, 3.5 weeks. He went without conceding a single goal. Can't tell me that's not impressive no matter what era it is. It's dope. The Sens obviously hit some financial difficulties in the early 30s, so they suspended operations 1 year. He went over to play with the New York Americans on a quick loan. Didn't like it there. He was a secretary for the Ottawa Fire Department, so he would often work there in the off season and thought it was a better paying profession. So he kind of wanted to leave the game a few times in his heyday to provide for his family. His 1.91 goals against any goalie in NHL history. 1.91 goals against average. What is it inflated, Robbie? 2.42 or something like that?
Well, a career, it's 2.56.
Okay, well, that's still stupid to me how they think. Like, in 2050, they're going to be doing this again because the era in which they play now, people won't know what to contrast it with. So let the era speak for itself. 1.91 in his career, and shut up. 81 shutouts as well. So that's like tied for 6th all time or something. And he only played 418 games. So 20% of his career games, he shut them out.
So what was the year they could start passing forward? That confuses me. What year is that?
1929. 29-30 season.
Yes.
It's a tough one.
He had seasons of 15, 13, and 15 shutouts between 25 to 28. So 43 shutouts in 3 years in that span. Then he did retire briefly, came back with Montreal Maroons, led them to the 1935 Cup. It was the last time that any non-original 16 won the Cup for 39 years until the Flyers did in 74. That was some bad math. 39 years. So he came into the Maroons organization, took over, and won them a cup. So he has 2 cups, 1.12 goals against average in that playoff season. So Alex Connell, Hall of Famer.
I had Alex Connell as, I think, my 27th pick for this list.
Yeah. So just
off the list.
That's good.
So before guys could start passing the puck forward, he was a dynamo, like he was killing it. The year, what'd you guys say, 29-30?
29-30.
Mm-hmm.
So what, 30-31, he had a goals against average of 3. And
yeah, they were asked that year.
And 32-33, 2.58. 34, again, 3. But he didn't really play that game. He didn't really play much that. I think, what's NYA? Is that the Americans?
Yeah.
New York Americans, yeah.
So he played 1 game with them, so that doesn't really count. But then was serviceable for Montreal for the rest of the year. That one year, 34-35, 48 games played, he was a beast. Like
9 shutouts.
9 shutouts. So yeah, that's like the only year I give him credit for. Every other year, asterisk.
Oh, come on.
It's like he's on steroids.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's like when you have these rules, these limitations, if you're not allowed to pass the puck forward, who do you hold up as the dominant goalies of those eras of which you put asterisks? He's one of them. He has to be. He's one of the best of those times, no matter what the era is.
How do you put him above guys who have to face 3-on-1s or 2-line passes, breakout passes where guys can get into the zone with one pass instead of having to pass it 50 times just to get in the zone? Like, to me,
3-on-1s can still occur. 3-on-1s? What do you mean 3-on-1s?
Well, I mean, like, in more frequency, a lot more frequency.
Okay, well, these guys are also bashing each other on the mouths with their wooden clops. It was a much more savage game.
Dude,
No masks.
they lived in caves back in the 20s. They didn't know what hockey was. They barely knew it. They could barely speak English back then. The alphabet wasn't even formed yet.
You're the textbook definition of presentism. Alex Connell. And my 16th place is Tony Esposito. Shout out to Tony, Sault Ste. Marie, an Italian boy. I don't know if he turns up on your list. Maybe he will. Maybe he won't. 76 career shutouts. 69-70. Fantastic. So, like, where does the 70s, like, what's your opinion on that? Because his 69-70 season where he won the Calder at age 27 is one of the finest goaltending seasons on record, where he had 15 shutouts, 2.17 goals against average, first team All-Star, runner-up for the Hart. Got his nickname as Tony O, 1.77 goals against average in 72, where he won another Vezina with Gary Smith. Like, those are impressive numbers. And
I have Esposito at 11.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fourth goalie to win both the Calder and Vezina in the same season, along with Brimsek, Tom Barrasso, and Eddie Belfour. The guy was good, man, and he played until he was 41, played 16 years with the Blackhawks, never managed to win a cup, but he did win a cup with Montreal in 69 as a rookie. That famous game where Phil scores on him twice when he was a rookie. One of 8 goalies who caught right-handed to win the Vezina. Pretty cool stat there. And he played in the Summit Series as well, but that international stuff doesn't apply to this argument. But in 80, where we talk about 80s goaltending, he had 6 shutouts that season in the first year post-WHA expansion and merger. But yeah, Tony Esposito, man, legendary goalie. We put him up on a pedestal, kind of our parents who can recall his play in the 70s. And it does serve quite well when you look into his numbers and dive deep on him.
Yeah, I actually have him in my top 10, so a little bit higher than what Robbie is going to end up putting him at. But, top 10 for pretty much all the same reasons that you mentioned there, especially the 15 shutouts in a season still being a record that stands to this day.
No one's had that many, yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, I was kind of debating between a group of guys to kind of put into the top 10, and that stat alone was the thing that I felt kind of elevated Tony O into tier, just because, like, you think of all the great goalies that have played after him, and no one's even really come close to touching that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like, his career goals against is 2.93, but adjusted it's 2.58. 3 Vezinas. Did he win any cups? I don't think he won any cups, right?
Just 69 with the Habs, but he was the third string.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, like,
the cup though.
It is what it is. I mean, the guy's one of the greats. I can't argue with having him in your top. I know he's borderline threshold 15 for you, Beta. That's 16, but top 15 spot for Mr. Espo, I think, is respectable.
If he retired right after he was in the first team All-Star in 1980, he's an easy top 10 for me. But if you look at his numbers the last 4 years of his career from 80 through 84, it's one of the worst in the league. And that ruined it for him.
Yeah, I think that's just 80s hockey kind of caught up to him, though. I think.
Oh, did it ever, though?
I think that's, like, the thing with the 80s is it was almost, I think, like, the skaters and goalies, I think, just kind of progressed at a different rate. And, it was kind of similar through, like, the 30s, the 40s, and 50s. But then when it hit the 80s, it was just skaters got so much better, and goalies didn't quite get that much better at the same pace and it really took kind of until Patrick Waugh showed up, kind of introduced the butterfly to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And then slowly other goalies would kind of start to adapt that going forward. And that kind of brought the 90s back into what we've been saying is probably the best era of goaltending in hockey history. But the 80s was definitely kind of definitely a little bit of a lull. And I think some of those guys like Tony Esposito that were, arguably one of the best goalies in the world through the 1970s, when he ended up playing the end of his career in the 80s, it just kind of devastated some of his overall career numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what I'm afraid will happen to a lot of these guys that are great goaltenders that you have in your list here, Robbie, like Pekka Rinne and Carey Price. It's like, who's to say the last 4 years of their career will just be tainted in shambles?
Well, how old's Rene now? He's like, what, 37, right?
38.
38. So he's done. Like, he's not going to
Same age as King Henrik.
So, I mean, he's still playing at a pretty decent level. It's not like he's bad, right? Guys get older. Guys get older faster than they ever have done before,
Yeah.
just because the toll that all this crap, like lifting weights, is not good for you. Like, all this crap puts a toll on your body. Like, but
They should go back to living in caves like the goalies in the 20s did, because it sure worked for them.
Like, Jesus Christ, that's why they're so short. They're always slunched over. Like, the freaking caves were like 3 feet tall. Like George Hainsworth, how tall was he? He was like 2'2", no?
Yeah, 5'6", 2'2", same thing.
That's what I mean. So I think
short, though.
We're going back to you now, Mr. Dirk.
Yeah, so a couple guys I think we already touched on, but yeah, so for 15 to 10, I have Roberto Luongo, Bernie Perrant, Turk Broda, Frank Brimsek, and Ken Dryden.
Nice. Well, I'll tell you right now, Broda and Brimsek are my 13 and 12 as well. And this is something now that you guys aren't aware of because I haven't published my top 15.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm actually kind of excited when we do get to you.
Yeah. Broda and Brimsek, 13 and 12. Very interesting.
Kind of already touched on everything with him. Bernie Perrant was obviously, he was the goalie for the Flyers dynasty. Also kind of had that super cool mask that ended up being the Time magazine cover. So kind of just sort of elevated a little piece of hockey culture there. 2 All-Star 1 appearances. He has 2 Conn Smythe trophies. Beda, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe another goalie has 2 Conn Smythe trophies.
Patrick Waugh has 3.
Patrick Waugh has 3. Perfect. All right. Well, he's higher on my list, so that's a good thing. I have that argument for when we talk about Patrick Waugh. But yeah, and obviously, but does Patrick Waugh have a back-to-back 2 Conn Smythe trophies?
No, only 3 in 3 separate decades, which is cool.
Which is also crazy, but yeah, so back-to-back Conn Smythe trophies during the Flyers dynasty. Turk Broda, like you said, he's probably the best goalie in Leafs history. Obviously, part of the things that he did, like he was the goalie for the legendary 1942 Stanley Cup final where the Leafs had to come back from being down 3-0 against the Detroit Red Wings. He was also kind of a bit of a character too, which made him a lot more popular amongst the fans at that time. He has that one hilarious picture of him eating pancakes inside the net, which I just think is a great image in hockey history. Doing a little bit more reading on him, apparently, the coaches thought that, he was a little overweight. So they challenged him to lose weight. And then obviously he ended up losing that weight and making the weight. But years later, he revealed to everybody that he actually rigged the scales so that he could make weight. So he spent more time rigging the scales than probably actively trying to lose weight, which I think is just, that's the kind of professional athletes that I aspire to be. Frank Brimsek, Beda can probably touch on him a little bit more too. Mr. Zero, one of the coolest nicknames a goalie could possibly have, obviously for his shutout record. So there's a little bit of that extra. I think part of what makes some of these guys legends is just a little bit of that aura surrounding them. Just like, that they're great. And things like naming a guy Mr. Zero based on how many shutouts he has is one of those things. Again, he's probably the greatest American goalie of all time as well. And so you can kind of add that to it. He also
a little bit of a look there.
Yeah, I wonder who's
I'm
the
nodding. I appreciate it. I want to piggyback on these points you're making about Broda and Brimsek since we have them in the same spot. But Robbie just gave you a look.
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious who Robbie thinks is the greatest American goalie of all time now. Robbie. But based on what he said there,
John Van Beesbrook.
There was probably Brimsek was, he's really high on this list, but he probably wasn't even the best goalie of his era, and I may get to that later. I don't know if Beda will get to that later, but I haven't seen the rest of his list. But and then I know this is Robbie's favorite goalie, so we got to talk about it. Ken Dryden, we kind of we got those things. We all kind of love that chapter of Derek Sanderson's book where he's just ripping on Ken Dryden, calling him super overrated. And as funny as it is, Derek, you still couldn't score on him, man. So I mean, you can call him overrated all you want, and you still couldn't score on him though. And he had 5 All-Star 1 appearances, which is really, that's the Vezina trophy back then. Even if you do want to say he didn't deserve all his Vezinas, he still probably would have ended up with 5 of them. Obviously, the backstop for the Habs dynasty in the 70s. His record is absolutely insane as well. If you just, I know I've been kind of saying that wins and losses aren't everything, but when you look at Dryden's overall career record here, 257 and 74. I mean, the man has more ties than losses. It's insane. It's that is out there, and for that, he just comes to outside my top 10. I am curious to see what Robbie thinks is the greatest American goalie now, and I'm also kind of curious to what Beda has, considering we have Bressette and Beda in pretty much the exact same spot.
I will say that, let's say Ken Dryden.
So, hey, Turk Beda, unanimous decision across the board.
Shout out to Turk, man.
Yeah.
I will say, let's say Ken Dryden was playing today, and he had just wrapped up the 1979 Cup, right? So like he's just done everything that he has done in his career. Let's say this is the present day, and he didn't retire and he went on to have a subpar rest of the career. That hurts. But the fact that he did retire when he was on top and he was only 31, that really pays the dividends to seeing him in that brief but monumentally impressive scale of winning 6 cups in only 7.5 seasons, really, because he sat out a season in 73, 74 because he wasn't happy with his contract. He did legal clerk work in Toronto, came back in 74, 75, and then played another 5 years and won 4 cups, 4 Vezinas for All-Star Team 1 selections. And Jesus, yeah, like he is a beast for sure. So
I have Dryden in my top 10. I know I shit on him a lot, but I have him.
I'm so proud about that.
As you should, though. I mean, I was debating about putting him in the top 10, but then he ultimately.
Once I went through like the advanced analytics, like all the advanced stuff, it's just like you really can't deny. Like at some point, stats do matter. Like he's got by far like his era adjusted goals against average is 2.03, like a 922 save percentage. He plays terrible in every big game he's ever been in, but like overall scale, dude's tremendous. Five Vezinas, countless cups. He's killing it.
I don't think he necessarily plays really bad in every big game he's ever been in. He's just played really bad in every big game that you've watched.
Yeah. I've seen him 4 games. In those 4 games, he just does not look good.
I think, though, at the end of the day, though, I still, as impressive as that wins-loss record is, I still think that's a team stat. We've talked about, we've even highlighted a few goalies in here that you mentioned, especially with Charlie Gardner, is like great goalie just on a crap team.
Mm-hmm.
And Ken Dryden, I think this shows what you get when you have a great goalie on a great team. And like that record is just a mind-boggling number to see. Could they have done, if you put Tony Esposito on that era of the Montreal Canadiens, maybe it's a similar record. But it's like that team is just, they're probably the best team of all time, the 70 Habs, and Dryden was the goalie during that era. So you got to show him the respect in being the goalie that backstopped one of the greatest teams of all time too.
That's right.
Well, good.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really much you can argue with. I have Bernie Perron higher. Obviously, I have Luongo 1 spot lower than you do, but I mean, to each their own.
Same thing.
But yeah, I don't even have my top
11, Robbie.
So I mean.
All right, so what's your 15 to 11 here then?
Yeah, so 15 I got good old Billy Smith, the GOAT. 14 I got another New York goaltender, Henrik Lundqvist. At 13 I have Ed Belfour. To 11. At 12 we have Beda, and at 11 I have Esposito. So there's not really too much difference. But yeah, Belfour, I couldn't really put him in my top 10. Like, he's not one of the better goalies. Like, he's one of the better goalies, obviously, at the 90s. And even early into the 2000s, he was really good. But, like, if you're talking about top 10 territory, you have to be one or two at the very least within your generation of players, for my criteria at least. And he just wasn't that. But still great numbers, over 400, almost 500 wins, 76 shutouts. I mean, 2.50 goals against, 157.3 goalie point shares. I mean, the dude was a stud. He's got, he's got everything you would want, right? Does he have 2 Vezinas? Is that what I'm seeing here?
Belfour?
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 Vezinas, 4 Jennings.
4 Jennings. I mean,
Stanley
pretty
Cup,
crazy.
obviously.
Sick. Great mask.
Yeah,
Broda, same thing. Like, just looking at his numbers, like, I kind of regret putting Bauer ahead of Broda because Broda's numbers are better than Bauer's. More wins, and obviously more games played too, but just kind of a hindsight there. So that's really the only regret I have on this list, is putting Johnny Bauer so high. But like I said, I kind of romanticized him as a Leafs fan. Yeah, Esposito, like, same reason. Like, he's not in my top 10. It's just he just had a bad rap, I guess, for later on in his career. But dude's still a stud. Over 400 wins as well. One of the all-time greats. Not great goals against average flat out, but era adjusted, it's 2.58, so it kind of comes down a bunch. So that works out well for him. He's also one of the greats. 3 Vezinas. Dude's a stud. There's really not much more I have to add. You guys pretty much covered. I mean, Lundqvist, though, the Lundqvist thing that I'll say why I put him ahead of Luongo is because he has that Vezina. And really only has, 5 less wins. Or pardon me, 40 less wins. And Luongo's got over 200 more games played. Not exactly give or take, but about that. Similar numbers all around, but he's got that Vezina, and that's kind of the push ahead for me. But like I said, if Luongo had something, if he had anything, he would be a top 10 goalie for me. But Lundqvist, without a doubt, is this generation's most consistent goaltender. Didn't win anything cup-wise. His Rangers team is always kind of disappointing, but I mean, he himself was always the best player on those deep playoff running teams. So it's just a shame he never really had 2 high of caliber players he played with. Like, who were the best players he played with, you guys would say? Like, Luongo had the Sedin twins in Vancouver, had some pretty good D on that team as well. Who did Lundqvist play with that you guys kind of look at and say, yeah, they're head and shoulders above the rest of the league?
I mean, Panarin's probably the best player, but Luongo's kind of toward the end of his career here.
Yeah. I mean,
who was on the Rangers? Like, who's the star on the Rangers when they went to the Stanley Cup final?
Gaborik, was he there then or no?
I think so.
Rick Nash.
When,
did he have Yager for a bit? Did they over?
Well, yeah, Yager was on the team when he started, but he was far gone by 2012. But he was there when he won when he was runner-up for the Art Ross in 2006, which was Lundqvist's rookie year, in fact, when he didn't even win the Calder.
So it's crazy. Like, he's been stupid consistent throughout his whole career, and he really hasn't played, in my opinion, with anyone really of that high of note. I mean, Stahl was probably his best defenseman throughout his career.
McDonough.
I can't really think of anyone else who was better than him. But
McDonough might be.
McDonough, yeah. I mean, he did a lot with, I think, a lot less than Luongo. But I mean, they're 1A, 1B for this generation, in my opinion.
Yeah. Sean Avery was on the New York Rangers. Dan Girardi, as far as a defenseman for him as well.
But yeah, very, very much.
I mean, yeah, they're who?
Just not top tier, top echelon guys. Really good guys. They got deep in a lot of playoffs. They got to playoffs pretty much almost every year, but they just could never make that extra push because they just didn't have that star power. But that's why he's higher than Luongo, just because of that Vezina and the consistency. But Luongo's right there too.
When Luongo went to the Stanley Cup final, the Rangers' highest leading, or the top 5 leading scorers for the New York Rangers were Marian Gaborik, Brad Richards, Ryan Callahan, Derek Stepan, and Michael Del Zotto.
Oh.
So that team went to a Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, just one's opinion. I think he made more than with a little less than Luongo did, but Luongo also had those years in Florida where they were terrible and he was propping them up. Even on this back end, Florida's still pretty good, so I can't really say the second half of his Florida career was all that bad either. But I just think Lundqvist with every pretty much every year for 10 years he was in like what top 6 Vezina voting. So I mean, to be at least a top 5 goalie for the better half of 2 decades, is you got to be in the conversation for one of the greats. But yeah, I mean, we pretty much touched on everyone else. Beta, you can feel free to add in, or you can go ahead with yours.
I'll do mine a little bit out of order because some of the guys that we have discussed, I'll get it done right away. So that being Broda and Brumsek, who Derek and I have congruently in 13th and 12th respectively, and then you have Broda in 12th, which is pretty blessed. Did you have Brumsek, Robbie? No.
Nope. Brumsek's
Shame on you. Nonetheless, yeah.
That's a shame. Broda. That's a shame. Yeah.
Hey, career goals against average 2.7. You guys have bumped him up. These guys are bums.
No. Mr. Zero. Nickname. Games. Regardless of what area you're playing in, to have 6 zeros in your first 8 games as a full-time starter, Boston Bruins, 1938.
Does that make your career? Like, that's a great story.
You know what?
That doesn't make your career.
Yeah. I had a guy come up to me in the Great Hall one day, and he asked where Frank Brumsek's plaque was, and then went on to explain that he wanted to see it because Frank Brumsek was his parole officer. Which I was suddenly like, should I be concerned about this or not? But you know, he just seemed like he wanted to show some love to his parole officer. But it was there's my interesting Frank Brumsek story.
Nice.
And for that story, I have to put him on my list no matter what.
That story definitely would do the trick for sure. And I'm sure he was relieved to find the plaque when you led to this ex-con.
Yeah, maybe he was just checking in. I don't really know.
First American ever inducted into the Hall. The first NHL American player was Hobie Baker. Shout out Hobie, rest in peace. But yeah, first NHL American player inducted in 1966. Frank Brumsek. 2 Cups, 2 Vezinas. Second all time in All-Star selections. 8 All-Star selections. 2 on the first team, 6 on the second. Robbie, don't care what you say. Luongo's selections, where are they? Oh, I don't see them. That's interesting.
Wow.
Shout out to Brumsek, Slovenian descent boy. Born in Eveleth, Minnesota, same town as my number 50 entry, Mike Karakis. They played baseball together growing up. Karakis was the catcher, hence his lightning fast glove hand. Brumsek was a pitcher. Don't know what that has to do with hockey, but Frank was a multifaceted athlete. So shout out to Frank. Got the cup in 39. They beat the Leafs in the finals. They beat Broda in the finals. In fact, his first ever career win was against Broda as well in that same season. 33 wins, 10 shutouts, 1.56 GAA in his first season. Hard to say people have had better first seasons. That's definitely one of them. Played a stand-up style, really quick catching hand. Would take the feet out of his opponents in tight. Third on the Bruins shutout list behind Tiny Thompson and Tuukka Rask. 4th all-time in playoff wins, which is pretty good considering how short the series were back then. Fewer series, fewer games. And then, yeah, Turk Broda, all-time playoff goals against average of 1.98, 13 shutouts in the playoffs. 5 cups. Both he and Brumsek missed 2 years to serve in the Army for their respective countries. Brumsek serving for the States, Broda serving for Canada. Heroes as well, beyond hockey legends. They're national heroes. And Turk Broda, yeah, like I loved how you mentioned the Battle of the Bulge that he had with Conn Smythe, where he had to lose how much weight. I've read different sources, different weights, but apparently it was 10 pounds he had to drop, and the scales were rigged. Because there's a lot of pictures of him in like the sauna eating like a piece of lettuce or something. He just looks miserable because apparently he was actually trying really hard to lose this weight, but no matter what he did, no matter how much he sweat in practice, he wasn't meeting the weight day in, day out. But then he rigged the scales and got the decision. Conn Smythe had threatened to bring in Al Rollins and Gil Meyer, the backups that they had from Buffalo, up to replace Broda if he failed to meet the weigh-in, but he was successful. They brought up Rollins anyway.
You had Al Rollins somewhere on your top 50 or something, eh?
34th, yeah. I did, yeah. Shout out to Al Rollins, Hart Trophy winner. That's right, for the lowly Blackhawks in '54. What is
Hey,
that?
one
Robbie's
of
giving me the
yeah,
finger, everyone.
yeah, there you go.
But
Thumbs down. Who
That
was
is
your
kind of cool though. I mean, there's only been what 7 goalies that have won a Hart Trophy,
yeah,
and then one of them has it twice. But like
yeah.
to be a goalie and win a Hart Trophy is a really big deal, and I feel like that kind of could elevate your status up a list like this. Even though I don't think either one of us has too many of the Hart Trophy winners on our teams on our top 25s right now.
Yeah, I mean, I do like Al Rollins. The only reason he wasn't higher, because apparently he was the most elite as they come in the early 50s, mid 50s, but he just didn't play long enough and then kind of chose to go down to the minors because he just couldn't hack it in Chicago much longer. And then he had a brief stint with the Rangers. Enough on him, though. So, yeah, Broda, Brimsick, 13 and 12. My 15th is Ken Dryden, believe it or not. I don't know if you expected me to have him on this list, but I do have Ken. We're all kind of showing love to Ken, and rightfully so, because aside from the games that we've watched, like classic games that we've analyzed where he's piss poor in comparison to his contemporary or opponent, be it Tretiak in the famous 75 game or Gilles Gilbert in the Too Many Men on the Ice game, overall, the numbers do speak for themselves for Ken. 5 Vezinas and only 7.5 full seasons. Got a Conn Smythe before he won a Calder, 6 cups, 201 more regulation wins than losses, including playoffs. He only lost 89 games in his entire. So, yeah, Robbie had him at wherever. Where do you have him? At 7. Okay, well, swag. And Derek had him at 11. I have him at 15, so I'm the least generous. But all the times we were up on him, I don't know. Did you expect me to have him on this list?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I definitely expected you to have him on the list.
Because at the
It's
beginning,
Ken Dryden, bro.
I don't know
I mean,
if we were recording when you said, "Oh, I definitely have him way higher than you," and you do by 4 places. But I do show my respects.
yeah, like I think it's one of those things where it's like, we just kind of like to rip on him for some reason, and it may or may not be deserved. Honestly, for me, I think part of it's just because he's a Hab, and I'm like, I just don't like you anyways because you're a Hab, and you're going to be lower on my list because you're a Hab. But that being said, it's like you can't. He's one of those guys that it's like I feel like you can kind of hate him, and then you kind of look at the numbers, and it's like, well, how do you deny this as one of the greatest goalies of all time? He's kind of, it's funny, like I know part of it's because he played on the Habs, but he's kind of got like just some absurd, like they're almost like if Gretzky has the greatest stats for a forward, his like Dryden's goalie stats are probably like the equivalent of like Mario's sometimes, where it's just like like maybe you could argue that there's better players out there than him, but at the end of the day, like his stats just kind of make you laugh sometimes because they're so insanely good.
Yeah, and I kind of mentioned very briefly a few minutes ago how the fact that he retired so young, you can justify his stats in that jumble of greatness, whereas he didn't tail off, he didn't overextend his welcome in the league. It's hard to say with these current guys that we're talking about how they're going to fare down the stretch of their career, but with Dryden, it was very short, very sweet, and very bold. Points, like 79% winning percentage in his career. He had 10 shutouts in 76-77, which was the most any goalie had between 1975 to 1996. So all throughout the 80s, of course, was bum-ass goaltending, but Dryden's 10 shutouts in 77 was the most for a couple decades worth. So shout out to Ken Dryden, retired at age 31, Hall of Famer in 83, great author, member of Canada Parliament for 7 years for the Liberal Party. Shout out to Ken. I'm going to do it out of order. I'm going to do my 11 before I do 14 because my 11 is someone that Derek mentioned at the beginning, which is Tiny Thompson. Tiny Thompson gets the 11th spot in my list. I give him the edge just above Brimsick. So Brimsick and Thompson, Brimsick replaced Thompson as the starter in 38. I put them pretty much on the same level. I give Thompson the edge because of reasons that Robbie hates, inflating stats. Thompson's numbers, just in the when he played, his rookie year was the year of the shutout, and he won the cup for them by posting 12 shutouts and a 1.15 goals against average as a rookie. You just got to show some respect to that no matter what the era is. Then the year after they allowed forward passing, he had 38 wins in 44 games. They went 38-5-1, which is still the highest winning percentage in a single season in NHL history, 87.5% winning rate. No one's ever probably going to beat that unless they just catch absolute fire. Won 4 Vezinas, which was the most of anybody up until Bill Durnan passed him with his 6th in 1950. So for the first quarter century existence of Vezinas, Tony Thompson was the guy. 3 shutouts in 5 playoff games in 1929, and he only conceded 3 goals. So he had a 0.6 goals against average in his first playoff run. 11 shutouts when he won the Vezina in 1933, 1.76 goals against average. 10 shutouts in 1936 when he won his third Vezina. The year that he was traded to the Bruins, he had just come off winning his 4th and final Vezina. He was nicknamed Tiny because when he was a teenager, he was actually the tallest member on his team. He was only 5'10", but of course, they were cavemen back then, as Robbie alluded to, and they're used to having the slouch, so they weren't as tall. But 5'10" was the tallest member on his teenage team, so they called him Tiny as a joke. But then when he went to the pros, that nickname kind of changed to symbolize the percentage or the odds of scorers scoring against them. The odds of scoring against him were tiny, hence his nickname. And it's a shame that people don't remember him because he played 100 years ago, well, 90 years ago. But
people like Robbie don't remember him.
He led the NHL in wins 5 times. That says something. He only missed 1 game in his first 10 years. So he was extremely durable. There's that really iconic photo of him. You said he popularized the glove save kind of, Derek, which is definitely true. There's that really famous photo of him, and you know which one I'm talking about. It's like going to be the first one that you search, of him kind of sprawling across the crease. He's got his stick out, kind of his hand sliding down the shaft of the stick. He's got his left hand out, really shitty, primitive gloves. And he's wearing absolutely no hint of shoulder pads. Let's see if you call this up here. It's Joe Rogan. Hey, Jamie, call up that picture. If you search Tiny Thompson images, it's the second one. You know what I'm saying? Are you doing this as well? Yeah, that photo there, and that's the one I'd like you to use for the article as well. But that's just like, look, he's got like no hint of shoulder pads. You can see his bones through his shirt. Horrible glove. Apparently he was robbing people left, right, and center with that glove. And his bare face, right? Like, great haircut, great flow on the guy. Best Bruins jersey they ever had. Look at that one. That's one we have in the hall there in that vintage section.
I like how you can literally see the individual fingers on the glove.
Yeah. So Tiny Thompson comes in just before my top 10. And my number 14, I have a really nerdy ass story, but my number 14 is Clint Benedict, the first person to ever wear a mask in the history of professional hockey. Not only did he innovate that, which that single-handedly has to put him in the top, like something for goaltenders, because he backed up his play statistically, but he created something that is absolutely essential for any goalie to have. They have to pay respects to Clint Benedict. The youngsters, all you youngsters out there, you people that come in here and play goalie and you want to get your rinky-dink design on your mask, you need to respect the forefather, Clint Benedict, for allowing you this piece of safety equipment.
You know, it's actually kind of funny. It's like, for similar reasons, I was going to put Benedict on the list, and then he's probably like the 26th guy. So, I mean, if I didn't put Potvin in there just for the emotionalness, he would have been 25th. But like, the reason I kind of dropped them, though, was just, and I'd be curious, again, to kind of just hear your debate on it, was almost his entire career, I think, with the exception of 1 or 2 seasons, is before the forward pass.
Yeah.
Right. Which is a major, and then for the 29-30 season, like, scoring basically doubled in the NHL through that. Right. So
very true.
And like, I mean, he obviously has the first goalie to have a mask, which I think is great, and won a handful of cups with the Ottawa Senators too. But I just think, like, playing in that era is maybe a little bit different, but he's probably the best goalie from that era too.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Him
right.
and
He was the
Hainsworth
best
would
goalie.
be up there.
Well, yeah, he and Hainsworth only overlapped by a few seasons, and Benedict was in his late 30s basically by the time Hainsworth came on the scene. Mind you, Hainsworth was a 33-year-old by a couple of years, but Benedict had toiled in the Senators organization since 1912 in the NHA. So he was the goalie. I guess you could say he's the oldest goalie I have on this list, because I have him and Vezina at number 30. But
I would be shocked if you have a goalie older than Clint Benedict on your list.
Right. Like Vezina and Benedict squared off against each other the night the puck first dropped in NHL history. December 19th, 1917, the Senators and Benedict played Vezina and the Habs. First game ever. Habs won 7-4. And back then, like, scoring was quite kind of frequent. It tailed off in the late 20s with all those shutouts and that we're talking about on and on throughout the night. But Clint Benedict, keep in mind, also innovated the second most important thing for a goaltender to do is be able to leave his feet. He's the reason that you can sprawl on the ice, on your knees, on your ass, on your elbows to make saves. Back then, you would get a penalty for dropping to your knees to try to make the save. He would wear cricket pads. He never adapted to any modern padding technologies or anything like that as wide as they got and ballooned out in the 20s. He wore cricket pads, and he would feign falling to make it look like it was an accident when he'd come up with the puck. So a few weeks into the NHL, Frank Calder then said, I don't care if they want to stand on their heads. It makes no difference to me. Go ahead. So not only do goalies owe their facial safety to Clint Benedict, they also owe the ability to sprawl on the ice to make saves. So two massive innovations. And then again, the guy backed up his play. He was the runner-up for the first. Weren't a thing until he was already 35 years old. And he still played pretty well. He was always a runner-up. He was always in the conversation, but George Hainsworth, time and time again. But the year of the shutout, he had 11 shutouts, 1.49 goals against average, career best 1.42 in 1927 with 13 shutouts, four-time cup winner, part of that first dynasty of the Senators where he won 3 and 4 years, 1920, 21, 23. In fact, he, as a character, makes this list as well because he would do all this stupid shit. He would not only test it by trying to fall to his knees, but then he would start doing things like taking his glove off and throwing the puck down the ice with his bare before games. Like he was rip-roaring drunk during the Senators 23 Cup run, and his trade to the Maroons in 24 was because he would show up wasted to games and actually play pretty well, but management's like, hey, you got to cut that out. And he said, no. And then they went to court, and they both kind of had definite. And then he went to Montreal Maroons and won a cup in 26 because he was a pretty damn good goalie. His goals against average in the finals against the Victoria Cougars was .75. So pretty damn good goalie, often drunk, created the mask, created the rule to fall to your knees. He would hang a horseshoe in his net for good luck. He was just a quirky guy. He was the Gilles Gratton of the 20s. And when I first got into hockey history when I was about 8, I was so enthralled by him as a figure, because the first picture that I ever saw was him in that mask, right? It's kind of scary. And when I was 8, I thought it was so cool that I kind of started reading about him in this book I had. And I was so like moved by him as like he was like my hero that my mom baked a cake and we celebrated his birthday when he would have been 100. So yeah, I always had an affection towards Clint Benedict, an affinity towards his legacy, and he rightfully comes in at 14.
We should do that again as like a CPR podcast. We should get together and celebrate Clint Benedict's birthday with a cake.
Let's do it.
We should bring back the tradition. But basically what I'm gathering from what you've just said is Benedict kind of led the way on a lot of innovations, including the one where goalies are weird as fuck.
That's right. Absolutely. And that, like, yeah, so if you judge your list based off numbers, what have you, like I'm judging it. He backed up with some pretty damn good numbers for the times, but also just he segued the way that, like, it's like a game of telephone. He was the operator. He created the message that was passed on through the generations, and now we have these quirky cats like Ilya Bryzgalov. People say is one of the weirdest people ever. That's bump on the flea's ass of Clint Benedict. Clint Benedict was the GOAT, shit disturber, and crazy cat of goaltending in the NHL.
What a tough bounce. Tough bounce that list took right there.
Robbie's like, Derek's pick of Osgood looks real good right now.
Oh, please.
Osgood over Benedict all day, every day.
Get out of here with that bullshit, man.
Good God, man.
Hey, I have Osgood higher than Benedict too, man. It's the way it is.
So he's this high because he fell to his knees once in a while and he wore a mask.
How does that not impress you? Even though you've explained it clearly as bluntly as possible.
Robbie does it. I told you, man. Whether it's
derogatory
sports,
as possible.
Okay. Here's a perfect example. Who invented the curveball in baseball?
I have no idea. I don't know much about baseball history, to be honest with you.
Either.
Andy Cummings, Hall of Famer, not one of the greatest pitchers of all time. Perfect example.
Okay, but Benedict was one of the best goalies of all time, though. He's a Hall of Famer. He won 4 cups, led the league
Andy
in shutouts.
Cummings is a Hall of Famer too.
Years.
But he's not top 25.
Benedict should be.
But you know,
he should be top 25. Absolutely.
In baseball, though, Babe Ruth is widely considered one of the best players of all time, and he was the 20s too.
Yeah, but he was an anomaly, Derek. Like all time, OPS, advanced save metrics for baseball say he was a freak in the 1920s. Dude's Barry Bonds level without the steroids. So I mean, Hank Aaron hit a lot of home runs because he played for a long time, so credit to him. He just was consistent as fuck. Babe Ruth was just a monster. He was hitting home runs when no one else was hitting home runs.
That's probably why he's still remembered to this day, though.
Exactly. But he
I
was
have no idea
remembered
who
because
that
he was
Cummings
good.
guy is, though.
He was remembered because he was good, Derek. Because he's one of the greats. Clint Benedict apparently is great because he fell to his knees once in a while and wore a mask for the first time.
Innovation is part of my criteria, Robbie. If you haven't heard it once, then you'll hear it again. Did ever have back-to-back shutouts in NHL history? There's got to be people that are moved by that.
I wonder how long I could go on this and see how
with
mad.
those pads as well. Man, he was not messing around.
It's a tough one.
No,
All
it's
right,
not.
Derek, you're up.
Roberto
We're
Luongo, who will
back
be
to this,
forgotten
we're
by
back to this.
2050 because he's
Oh
not
my
credible.
God.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's okay, Beda. I'm going to start the list with another guy that Robbie's never heard of, anyways. It's fine. We can have a conversation here. All right. So I guess we're now, eh?
The tens. We're in the top 10.
Top 10's big
I
moments.
can't wait for when
moments.
Robbie puts Andre Vasilevsky.
The thing is, I've heard
Andre Vasilevsky, Ben Bishop, and
you guys are talking as if I've never heard of these guys. I've heard of all of these guys. I've done my own research on them. I just don't agree with you that they're this high.
I know.
Like, there are rules in place that
I'm well aware that you know who they are.
Okay, go ahead, Derek.
All right. Number 10, I have Bill Durnan. Carey Price. Number 8, Tony Esposito. Number 7, Ed Belfour. And number 6, Terry Sawchuk.
Ooh.
Would you have it 7?
Tony Esposito. I don't know why I had to stare so long at that list. I didn't actually write down the number of the 20 players' names, so I had to count a little bit there.
Carey Price, the 9th best goalie of all time.
I put Carey Price as the 9th best goalie of all time. I think. I think 2015 season that he had is probably one of the best goaltending seasons of all time. Same with Tony O having one of the best goalie seasons of all time, which kind of elevates that. I think Carey Price, over the course of his career, has just been one of the most steady and solid goalies in the league. And he's probably been the best goalie in the league the entire time. Vezina trophies are a little bit more spread out than, say, they were in the 90s or 80s. But, so he does still have his one Vezina from that unreal 2015 season. He also has, I think the thing for me that really elevates Carey Price, we talk about, Robbie especially has really been talking about the trophy case. He has a Hart trophy. And I think that really comes into being the one thing that I think elevates Carey Price is, they were looked at him and to be like, yeah, you're the best player in the league at any position, not just the goaltending. I think that's something that kind of elevates him. I think the Montreal Canadiens as a team, they've gone through their own ups and downs during Price's career. And, I think that's the whole thing that I think kind of comes back to. I don't think your record is necessarily the best thing to base a goalie off of, just because there is a little bit of the team element to it. And sometimes when the Habs were bad, despite how great Carey Price was, they couldn't dig them out of that hole. But when the Habs were good, Carey Price was, when they were making the conference final runs, Price was the key cog that made that team go. And I think even today, like, there's a perception with the Montreal Canadiens that it's like, if Price plays bad, you beat the Canadiens. If he plays good, then it's it'll be a good matchup. But if Price is on his game where he's playing at the best level that he possibly can, the chances of you beating the Habs are low because you got to figure out a way to score on Carey Price. And I know you've been avoiding talking about international accolades and stuff. I think seeing him play with the 2014 Sochi team was just kind of how damn near impossible it was to score on Carey Price during those. Just kind of also just shows how good he is when he has a defense in front of him, which sometimes he's been lacking with the Montreal Canadiens during that time. Anybody have some rebuttals to that before I move on to the rest of the list? Or
yeah, I mean, so you have Price ahead of Luongo.
I have Price ahead of Luongo, yeah.
Okay. See, I think
it's
Price when he's really good is one of, if not the best goalies, but throughout his whole entire career, his numbers just aren't as good as Luongo and Lundqvist.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that I think is just Luongo and Lundqvist had better teams around them at certain points of his career too. But even maybe not Luongo in Florida.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's I think Price, Luongo, and Lundqvist, I think, are the three best goalies of like this generation, the say post-lockout era. I think that's easily your top three. And I think the thing that, to me, that elevates Price over Luongo and Lundqvist is the Hart Trophy. I think the Hart Trophy, like I've said a couple times in this, only 7 goalies have ever won a Hart Trophy. So the fact that you have a Hart Trophy in your cabinet, that's the thing to me that elevates them a lot. Moving on, I guess we have Bill Durnin. Durnin, like, if a Vezina Trophy existed back then, in its act, he would have won it every single year. He did win it every single year in his non-current form. He is, I'm assuming, I didn't dive into it after. I'm assuming he's like, he pretty much the only goalie that's won a Vezina in, what did we have here? What do we have? 7 of his 8 seasons. Same with his, he was voted,
Wait, what'd you say? Sorry?
Bill Durnin has a Vezina Trophy in, what is this here?
6
of his 7 seasons. I was off by 1 when I said that. But he also has,
sick, though.
Yeah, it's unreal. It's, he has the All-Star 1 vote to go with it. So it's not even that he just had the best stats, the lowest goals against, the best goals against average. Save percentage wasn't really a thing like back then, but he probably had the best of that too. This guy played, he played 7 seasons, and he was considered the best goalie for all 7 of them, except the 1. But like his entire career it's unreal to say that you played for 7 seasons and you won the award for the best goalie 6 of those times. I think the other thing too, that kind of also elevates him is just the uniqueness of his equipment. Bill Durnin being ambidextrous, so he had his gloves specially designed. He can put the stick in either hand. He could catch a puck with either hand. There's no goalie out there that could do that. There's no goalie. So ultimately, I mean, you have a 7-year career where you have 6 All-Stars, 6 Vezinas, win 2 cups, do something as crazy as actually play goal ambidextrous. And obviously you're a Lock Hall of Famer as well. I think, it's super tough to, in my mind, to argue with Durnin being in the top 10.
Nice.
Tony Esposito, I had, basically we already kind of touched on that, same reasons that Beda mentioned when he was talking about him at 16. I guess value him a little bit higher, but we've already said what we need to say about him. Then I had Ed Belfour, who Robbie was saying. What did you say, Robbie, when you were talking about Belfour? It's like you couldn't put a guy that wasn't top 2 of his generation.
Yeah, I can't put a guy in the top 10 all time if he's not at least 1A, 1B of his generation.
See, and that's what I think about the 90s, though, is that
the
90s
a lot of representation.
Yeah, is by far the best era of goaltending. And I think I have him 4th from what I would consider Belfour's generation here. So my top 5 is going to be, it's pretty 90s heavy. But that's what I kind of think. I think it's the best. And I think being the 4th best goalie in the best generation is no shame. And I think, some of the guys that he's behind, even like winning Vezinas against who he had to win Vezinas against in the 90s. I mean, at one point he was so good that the Chicago Blackhawks were like, we can trade this Hasek guy because we have Ed Belfour. We don't need another goalie, which is also just an insane goalie tandem when you really think about it, that Hasek and Belfour existed as a tandem at one point in time. And, like even other things too, that little cultural thing of he has one of the coolest masks of all time too, the eagle. It's iconic. Weirdly, I think the best version of the eagle though was when he was on San Jose, just because I thought like the eagle on the teal looked really cool. Obviously, he didn't play that much on San Jose, but I think that to me is my favorite Belfour mask, just because I think the way the colors, the teal with the eagle, I think just looked a lot sharper than it did on some of the other teams that he played for. And then, Terry Sawchuk, he's definitely one of the greatest of all time. He held the shutout record basically forever until Martin Brodeur came along toward the end of his career. Multiple Stanley Cup winner, played or Gordie Howe Red Wings, the last Leaf team to win the Stanley Cup. He had, when the goalie mask was being introduced, he ended up with kind of one of the more unique, kind of scary looking ones that kind of had a little bit of that unique own personal flair to it. And yeah, I mean, he's just widely regarded as one of the best goalies of all time. I think the shutout record and how long that record stood for goes a long way to solidifying his place on this list as well.
So what could he have done to get 5th or 4th place?
I could say that, but then I'd be revealing who my 5th and 4th place guys are. So do we just say?
I want to know where he doesn't stack up to those 5th and 4th place guys. Yeah.
Well, you'll find out when we get to talking about those 5th and 4th place guys.
Yeah, I mean, I have Sawchuk in my top 5, just straight up.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm going on to mine, my 10, obviously we've already revealed that it's Johnny Bower. Kind of want to retract that now, but I'll stick with it. At number 9, Bill Durnan, for all the reasons Derek said. Just a monster.
Yeah.
He's one of the very few guys. I think I only have, 2 guys before the 1950s, I believe. So who did I have?
Robbie, I'm very pleased to hear that.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of surprised Robbie has a different.
I'm very surprised. List.
I mean, Durnan deserves to be in the top 10. So I'm not
Yeah, so pre-60s, the only guys I have on my list are Broda and Durnan. I was considering putting Lumley on there, but I was like, nah, screw Lumley. Who else do I got here? So Durnan at number 8, I have Bernie Perron. It's more about quality, not quantity for him. 2 cons. I think he's got a Vezina.
2 Vez.
Yeah, 2 Vezinas. Just a monster. Was pretty much the reason, other than obviously that whole team being pretty sensational, but kind of the key cog and being the grace to the Broad Street Bullies kind of grind, and he made it look very easy. Number 7, Mr. Ken Dryden. Again, just a beast. Numbers stack up against anyone's.
It's so funny how you put in the highest of the 3 of us, and you have the least amount of love for him, I think.
I know, but I'm a numbers guy. So I mean, when you look at the numbers, his save percentage 9.22, unreal. I mean, goals against average 2.24. His goals against average adjusted at 2.03 is unreal. It's filthy.
Means nothing to me.
What was that?
Means nothing to me, this adjusted nonsense.
I know it doesn't, and that's why you're a fool, and that's why you still live in the cave with Mr. Hainsworth.
Adjust it to his era, then. Adjust it to the 29.
Even in his era. Dude, what? When guys couldn't pass forward, you don't think Ken Dryden would be any better than he is today?
Okay, first off, I have to correct all this pass-forward bullshit we're talking about. The rule is you could pass the puck forward anywhere but within the offensive blue line.
Which makes no sense.
You could pass the puck forward all the way up to the other team's blue line.
When you think about it, though,
so you're 3-on-1
a lot of passes in the offensive zone, even today, go backwards. Like the guys going back to the point, that's a constant play in hockey. It's
sure, whatever, Derek. Whatever, Derek. That's your opinion. But at the end of the day, Dryden's a monster. At 6, and I think Derek, I know where you went with your top 5. I have Mr. Glenn Hall. So I'm guessing you have Mr. Glenn Hall in your top 5.
I do have him in my top 5, yes.
So Glenn Hall, again, just really good. He's on that precipice. He's just in every way just as good as Sawchuk, I think. But Sawchuk has more Vezinas. I don't know if you really want to add that up, but I mean, Glenn Hall does have the most All-Star appearances of all time.
See, that was kind of my tiebreaker on the split of. So I have Glenn Hall at number 5. So I initially had Sawchuk at 5, and then I switched Hall with them. And I think the big chunk of that was one, it was just their careers do significantly overlap a lot. But then Glenn Hall has the 11 All-Star appearances, which include 7 first All-Star appearances. Thank you, Beda. And so and he's playing at the same time as Sawchuk, and Sawchuk doesn't have that many first All-Star team appearances. But I think for me, the big one that kind of put it over the top for Glenn Hall over Sawchuk is the Conn Smythe Trophy.
Yeah.
Which, and that was in a losing effort with the St. Louis Blues, who, were the expansion team, and the way the conferences were kind of skewed. One of the expansion team was going to the Stanley Cup Finals, but Glenn Hall kind of dragged that team kind of kicking and screaming into the finals, and then in the finals with the Montreal Canadiens and stuff, he made it close. Like, all those games were, I mean, I think they still got swept, but those were 1-goal games constantly, and it was largely on Glenn Hall. And I think that just shows you how good of a goalie Glenn Hall is, when they were like, this team didn't win a game in the finals, but we're still going to give your goalie the Conn Smythe Trophy, because that's the only reason that these games were even close in the first place. So for that's why I give Glenn Hall the edge over Terry Sawchuk.
Yeah, I think the reason why I give Sawchuk the edge over Hall, and I was looking at Hall, and I was super close too. Like, I was gonna switch him up, but I think when you hold an NHL record, I think that just that gives you a little bit of a bump. And I know the Conn Smythe is big, but when you hold a record for what, 60 years?
See, you do 60 years, but it got broken. Glenn Hall has the most unbreakable record in NHL history. No goalie at any point in era. Exactly. No goalie at any point in era. No goalie in the future will ever do it.
Yeah, but like All-Star what? All-Star is based on, is it media who votes on that?
It was media that voted on that back in the day.
I mean, that's opinion. Like, shutouts is like a concrete fact. Like, and sure.
Consecutive starts. How is consecutive starts an opinion?
What? Like, what do you mean?
Like, 502 games started in a row.
Brett Favre, how many consecutive starts did Brett Favre have? Is he better than John Elway? No, like.
No, but he's not. But that's
something to still consider, though.
It's something to consider, but I mean, like, when you take a look at all-time goaltending records, no one mentions that, right? Like, that's not at the top.
Yeah, lots of people.
No way! Lots of people mention
it's written on his Hall of Fame plaque.
Robbie, I have Glenn Hall
goalies from the 1920s. Oh, you can play all the games in a row he wants, but when he shuts guys out, oh, sure, yeah, whatever. Get out of here.
Not saying that shutouts aren't important. In fact, they are more important, but
consecutively played all day, every day.
I'm pretty confident that 502 consecutive starts is written on his Hall of Fame plaque.
Yeah.
But what?
Like, I feel like it's not like a nothing record here, man.
I'm not saying it's not, but I'm saying the shutouts mean more.
84 shutouts is nothing to be ashamed of either, my friend.
But when you hold the record, you hold the record, damn it.
Glenn Hall's got a higher save percentage than Terry Sawchuk as well.
Does.
Same goals against average, though.
Sawchuk's got more Vezinas.
Yeah, he does, because the Vezina wasn't for the best goalie.
Yeah, but Sawchuk, when he won the Vezina, he clapped on everybody. From 1950 to 1955, you can argue that there's no span more than those 5 years that someone had like an immense impact on the game for goaltending. Like those 5 years, that first half of the 1950s decade, it's inconceivable how, like, you could say, Hasek in the mid to late 90s was, whatever. But Terry Sawchuk's 5 years from 1950 to 1955, if you look up his numbers, he won a combined 195 games, had 56 shutouts in those 5 years. Goals against average was never above 2. What are the inflated, whatever the hell it is, what are today's things on Sawchuk?
Beda just basically was like, hey, Robbie, what are the bullshit stats on
what are the bullshit stats? What's funny about this, though, is, Robbie, I'm actually agreeing with you. I have Sawchuk above Hall. But, Derek, I agree with you in the sense that talking about consecutive game starts is massive when you're talking about Glenn Hall's legacy.
All I'm kind of getting at is looking at the all-guys, which the media votes on it, but the media votes on the Vezina Trophy to this day as well, Robbie. So it's essentially the same thing. And it's just that I think looking at it, it was like back then, based on that, the people that covered hockey, the people that were knowledgeable about hockey, it looks like they favored Glenn Hall over Terry Sawchuk.
Sure. If you want to know
because
those,
Terry Sawchuk beat them and their wives because he was an alcoholic and a brutal barbarian.
That's only if you watch the movie Goalie.
What's funny is I'm like, in my article, I'm like, Terry Sawchuk, I could have put as number one on the list, but it was probably what bumped him down a few spots.
Yeah, you know what? That's why Glenn Hall hasn't had a garbage movie made about him, so he gets the bump too.
yeah,
Although
Glenn Hall,
getting a movie made about you though, as like a '50s hockey player, that's pretty solid.
Mm-hmm.
Not
they're
too many
both
guys have
dead
that.
even on goals against average. Goals against
Yeah.
average adjusted. Glenn Hall 2.59. Terry Sawchuk 2.73.
I feel like
game just doesn't translate to today's game, boys.
Well, he's still legendary.
I feel like ultimately, like, where do you have Sawchuk in your top 5? Is he 5 or is he higher?
No,
Beta?
Where do I have Sawchuk?
Yeah.
I'll get to that in a sec. Robbie, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Yeah, I will get to it though, Derek. What's Clint Benedict's inflated stats?
Oh, you want to see that?
Yeah. What's
You know
his
what?
inflated
They're not really that much different, to be honest with you. I think his career goals against average is like what 2.3 or some shit like that.
2.32 or something like that? Yeah.
His adjusted is 2.43, so it's not.
So 0.3 of a goal better than Sawchuk. So if you're using that bullshit in your arguments, I don't want to hear it because Clint Benedict is better than Sawchuk in that case.
But that's not what that. Sawchuk's got more wins, more shutouts.
They played more games.
They played more games. Like
I'm just trying to feel the fire here.
Yeah, no, this has been quite the banter-full evening here, lads. No, Robbie, I'm actually trying to. Well, you know what? It's hard, boys, because when you got Hall, Plant, and Sawchuk, it's the same dilemma as Brodeur, Hasek, and Waugh. It straight up is.
Which I'm sure we're gonna get to, unless anybody's got some surprise in their top.
But like I said, Derek, like I had Hall in my top 5, but bumped him because I just valued that record of shutouts more than
I did the opposite of you.
Fair play.
I think like there's just a lot. I think we're kind of splitting hairs on whether Sawchuk or Hall is better, and I think it's but I think with what we're kind of getting at, you and Beta kind of going back and forth with this era adjusted stats and stuff. This is one of the funner arguments to have historically because you don't need to era adjust their stats; they're in the same era.
Era adjusting stats is the same as like Robbie, you going into the workplace in the 1930s and telling everyone smoking's bad, or you going into the workplace when they're building the Titanic and saying, "Hey, you're going to need a stronger hull." Like enough of this seeing the future bullshit.
It isn't, because they played half the games, they faced less shots. It's a completely different game. That's why you adjust the era stats. That's why you do it.
Tiny Thompson making 111 saves in a 1-0 overtime loss in the 6th overtime of a decisive game in the 1933 playoffs.
That's one game. That's the exception, not the rule.
And smoking's bad for you in the workplace.
Tell us you're next on the list here, good sir.
Man, like,
I don't want to hear about a guy making 111 saves.
I'm just been grilling Robbie all night. I apologize to everyone.
No, this is what we're here for.
I do side with Robbie on the Hall Sawchuk thing for the first time. I mean, mind you, when Craig Anderson comes up in his top 3, I'm not going to be so happy.
Yeah. Vasilevsky.
My 10 through 6, I can make it very brief because essentially everyone has been touched upon, no matter how briefly. But my 10, I got Ed Belfour at 10. Really not much to say. Both you guys have already talked about him. I'm trying to look. I have all our lists side by side. We've got him at 13th for Robbie and 7th for Derek. Okay, cool. So I'm smack bang in the middle there. 10, 13, 7. Amazing. 9, I've got Hainsworth. Not Hainsworth. Hainsworth is my 8. But 9, I got Durnan, which is the same as Robbie, and 1 back of Derek. So 10, 9, 9. Very good correlate there with Bill Durnan. Really primitive gloves, but suited both hands where you could switch the stick. It's got a blocking backer on the one, blocking backside of the one hand there, and also the little trapping mechanism where he would be able to switch sticks on rushes. And when the puck was in the corner, he'd be able to have his shoulder against the post with the stick in either hand. and kind of deflect centering passes out to the slot. And the fact that he won 6 Vezinas in 7 years. He was on the scene as a 27-year-old, left the game at 1934. It's a bit of a shame how he left the game. He was so chronically riddled with anxiety and stress about letting his teammates down. That really had a profound effect on him down the stretch of his career. Also, the last game of the regular season in 1950, right before the playoffs, he almost severely had his scalp cut by a skate, and that kind of shook his confidence. And when you're a barefaced goalie in the 40s or any era before masks, it probably takes a toll on you. And guys like Sawchuk turned to drink, and other guys probably turned to other forms of domestic abuse. Simply couldn't handle the task of performing for a francophone team as well. He never felt the love from the Habs fans. But the stats do speak for themselves. 208 wins in 383 games, pretty good. It's nowhere near Dryden's win rate, but it's pretty damn impressive when you can win the Vezina in all but 1 year. And he only won 2 cups as well because the Leafs were kind of having their late 40s dynasty in the onset. And he had a bit of a tragic death as well, kidney failure when he was 56. But Bill Durnan gets the number 9 spot. So very close between the 3 of us there. I just said, I let it slip that I have George Hainsworth at number 8. I mean, Robbie's not going to want to hear it because of how the game was played back then. But essentially, some of the things he did were unfathomable. And you know what? You have to give him his due because he won the first 3 Vezinas there ever were. He came into a team when he was 33. He didn't expect to play professional hockey in the National Hockey League. Came into the league, replaced a guy who the trophy is named after. The trophy's namesake died of tuberculosis in 1926. Hainsworth's on the scene, wins 3 straight Vezinas, combined 49 shutouts, I think, in those 3 years, something like that. The year of the shutout, the last year without forward passing in the offensive zone, which we have to really specify there. You were allowed to pass the puck up the ice all the way to the other team's blue line if you cared.
My only thing with it is that scoring did literally double when they changed that rule. It did double. So it's like it
73-point Art Ross trophy.
Yeah, I get what you're saying with like it wasn't like the forward pass was a brand new concept. They just allowed it in a new zone. But the rule change did kind of lead to scoring significantly increasing after that.
But Hainsworth, the reason I have him so high is because he was the cataclysm. He was the pinnacle. He was the most elite goaltender of the late 20s, early 30s, where no matter what the rule changed, like his stats didn't deteriorate astronomically like they did for some other guys. Like I know Benedict was at the tail end of his career. Charlie Gardner obviously didn't have as much success with the forward passing rule, but yeah, he still put up pretty good goals against averages. And in fact, as soon as they implemented the rule, he won his 2 cups in Montreal back to back in 30 and 31. His only 2 cups. So the rule change actually helped his team for the greater good. Nonetheless, 22 shutouts in 44 game season. So a shutout every other game. In fact, Montreal only won 22 games that regular season. So the misconception is that every game they won, he had a shutout. That's not true. 6 of those 22 shutouts were in 0-0 ties, but still you get the message. They started 7-6-6, and then they went on a 31 game with only 1 loss to finish 22-7-15. He had a 270-minute shutout streak through the playoffs in 1930 there. So he gave up a goal 5 minutes into the first game of the series, best 2-3 series against the Rangers. The game went into 4 overtimes. The Habs won it, so he didn't give up any more goals. Then he shut them out in game 2 to sweep, shut out the Bruins game 1 of the finals, and then gave up a goal to Eddie Shore midway through the second period of game 2. So the 2 straight shutouts, but then he had a 4 overtime as well in there, and halfway through another game. It's 270-minute shutout streak in the playoffs. Pretty blessed. 2 cups, traded to the Leafs because the Habs needed a French-Canadian goalie during the Depression to sell more tickets. Hainsworth was an Anglophone, so they traded for Laurent Chabot in a direct player-for-player. And Hainsworth still, in fact, was pretty good. By the time he joined the Leafs, he was just about, he was 40 years old pretty much. And he led them to the finals in 1935, even though they lost. And he played in the first ever All-Star game, the Ace Bailey benefit. He was the goalie for the Leafs at the time, of course. So he has that accolade. And 94 shutouts, right? Like if we're going to talk about, if Robbie, your argument, Terry Sawchuk's shutout streak lasted so long. Well, Hainsworth had the shutout streak for 30 years himself. And 94 in an era when they're only playing 44 games, and for him to get 22 in one season and 15 in another and so on and so forth. Yeah, he had 14, 13, and 22 shutouts. So that's your 49 in 3 years, the first 3 years of his career. Thank you very much. So George Hainsworth, blessed, killed in a car crash at age 57. What a crying shame. My number 7, also, both of you guys have had him in the list. I think Robbie has him at 8. Yeah, Bernie Perrant.
Yep.
No, yeah, do you have him at 8? Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, Bernie. So the thing with Bernie is, we were talking about Carey Price, his best season where he won everything. Bernie just basically had the same thing, but twice in a row. 74, 75, best goals against average, most wins, Vezinas, and Conn Smythe, and he won the cup. So that makes it better than Price. And he did it twice. Twice as nice as Price, I say. So shout out to Bernie. And we watched him play in many classic games. He stands on his head. Tragically had that career-ending eye injury when he was 34. Still said he wanted to play into his 40s, and he didn't get that chance because of the masks. 70s masks. I refute my argument about 70s masks. They're a hazard. And
he made that unreal save on, I think it was like Messier at the Winter Classic alumni game too.
On Ron Duguay, yeah.
Oh, it was Ron Duguay, not Messier.
Yeah, very good save. I remember that game. That was so good. That was right when I got the box set of top 10 Flyers games. So I just binged all of Bernie's games on that too. And I was riding the Bernie high, riding the Bernie fan wagon, and he's 65 making saves there. It is a beautiful thing is his catchphrase. Shout out to Bernie. Yeah, I mean, some people might disagree that he's that high. I know, Derek, you had him at 16, something like that. 14, yeah.
14,
pretty good. I mean, definitely deserves to be in the top 25. No ifs, ands, or buts. And I'm glad that
it's interesting though, like our area of like between where we have Perrant is kind of similar, other than Carey Price, really.
Yeah.
But we just put Perrant on the opposite ends of it.
My favorite Bernie Perrant story for me personally is working up in the Great Hall. He comes up with, I don't know who it was. It could have been his daughter. It could have been his I don't know, his niece or something like that. She's pretty young. I guess not that young, but could have been his lover. I don't know. But regardless, comes up. He's got his 2 rings. He's got bare paws for hands. He looks at me and he's like, "Do you want to try them on?" And I was like, "What?" And of course I want to try them on. So I put them on, and literally I put his ring on my thumb, and it was still like twice as big as my thumb. So just bare paws for hands. So Bernie Perrant, excellent goalie, excellent human being.
Bernie Perrant has the biggest hands I think I've ever seen in my life. Other than, I think at like a fan expo one year, I met like Peter Mayhew, who's the guy that plays Chewbacca. And that dude is massive.
Yeah.
So the biggest hands I've ever seen are Chewbacca and then Bernie Perrant.
Nice.
That is very fair. Now, Derek, reveal your top 5 to us.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay.
Oh, Beda, who's your 6th?
No. Glenn's my 6th.
Glenn Hall, yeah.
Yeah, so basically, it's going to be like, I feel like our top 5s are all going to be the same guys, just rearranged slightly. I'm curious to see how it goes. But yeah, Glenn, Jacques, and Terry, for me, I had that same trifecta dilemma as I do with Dominic, Martin, and Patrick. I mean, those 3 goalies there in the original 6 are Sawchuk, Plante, and Hall are without a doubt the best. They're head and shoulders above the rest from that era. And Glenn Hall, like, I definitely value the stuff that will never be broken. You can talk about how he had 3 Vezinas, mind you. 2 of them were kind of with a partner. The last Vezina one was with Plante, and the second one was with Denny DeJordy, who in fact started a majority of the games in '67 because they kind of knew Hall was running out of time in Chicago before the expansion draft. They knew that they could only protect one, and they went with the younger DeJordy. So Hall's only true Vezina came in '63, but when you're riding him 70 games a year for 7 straight years, that has a lot to be said. And the 11 All-Star appearances too, like, God ultimately gave him the bump just outside the top 5, just because I feel like and you know what though, he also innovated the butterfly style. It's pretty good, but I just feel like the other 2 guys from that era just had a little bit more to boast about, and ultimately might have been better showstoppers and performers for the game of hockey. Mind you, his name is Mr. Goalie, so that's also tough.
Yeah.
There you go. So then, would I be correct in assuming, I'll do this in alphabetical order just to not give away my order quite yet, but would I be correct in assuming that everyone's top 4 is going to be Brodeur, Hasek, Plantois in some order?
Yeah.
No.
That's not your top 4 there, Beda.
I just have Sawchuk at 4 and Plant at 5. And that was
Already,
very
you
tough.
didn't actually.
That was
Okay.
the toughest one for me, actually. I'll say it on the record right now that I am still very tempted to put Plant at 4 and Sawchuk at 5, but
So you put Sawchuk up at 4 then? Okay.
I did. Yeah.
All right.
Wow.
I mean, yeah. Robbie, you have the same top 4 as me, depending on the order here.
Yeah, have you revealed who your number 1 is? You haven't revealed your number
I haven't revealed who anything is. So the order that I went with Brodeur at 4, Plant at 3, Waugh 2, Hasek 1.
Yeah, I went Plant 4, Brodeur 3, Waugh 2, Hasek 1.
I did the same as you, Robbie, but Sawchuk instead of Plant. So Sawchuk 4, Brodeur 3, Waugh 2, Hasek 1.
Yeah. So I mean, very similar.
Yeah,
like,
I think
at this level, like I know there's a lot of people who put Brodeur at number 1 because of the wins, because of the shutouts. But realistically, like the numbers and his goals against average career-wise is right there with Hasek. Like Hasek's got 2.20,
Yeah.
Brodeur's 2.24.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
no, it's all right there. I think
yeah.
Hasek. I think one of the things to me that separates Hasek is that he pretty much faced more shots than anybody throughout the 90s as well. He played on some Buffalo Sabres teams that were quite porous on defense, and he faced a ton of shots, and to do that and to constantly have the highest save percentage in the league, to me, I think is pretty impressive. Patrick Waugh, the butterfly, you can't we talked about how bad goalies were in the 80s and how great goalies were in the 90s. And the key thing that changed was Patrick Waugh kind of introducing a butterfly style, and all the other goalies either coming in with like a little hybrid version of it to get better, or the other goalies that basically completely adapted to a style similar to what Patrick Waugh was playing. And that kind of led to how great the goalies became after. There's a reason why we have so many 90s goalies in like the top 10s and definitely in our top 5s as well. Jacques Plante for me as Brodeur, obviously the great numbers, but again, the one thing that I went with the separator on it was Plante's got a Hart trophy. So you win the MVP as a goalie, I think that elevates you a lot. The only goalie that has 2 Hart trophies. So it's one thing to just be the best goalie in the league. It's another thing to be the best actual player, regardless of position in your league as well. Brodeur, I mean, all the shutouts, all the shutout record, you can't leave them. You can't have them outside of your top 5, no matter what.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's no argument. Like it's just really a preference thing at this point. You prefer the Hart.
Yeah.
Hasek's got 2 of them. That's why he's my number 1. Waugh's got 3 Conn Smythe. That's why he's number 2. Brodeur, all-time great goaltender. You ask 10 people, you'll get 7 different answers somehow. I don't know, but it's what you preference. Like if you preference winning the most, Brodeur. But although Waugh's right there with him, not in terms of overall wins, but in terms of cups. But Vezna's, Hasek's got 6, most for a modern day goalie. Most since they started awarding it based on who the best goalie is rather than least amount of goals given up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, Hasek was just the Dominator, the perfect nickname for a guy like him, the Dominator. Waugh was beautiful to watch, bit of a hot dog at times, but that's what made him him. Brodeur cheated on his wife with her sister, and then the rest is history. Who knows? So, but Brodeur is a great goalie.
Yeah.
Just maybe not a great.
Yeah,
was it the wife's sister? I thought it was the wife's.
I don't know.
Like brother's wife.
Is it the brother's wife?
It's still like the sister-in-law, but it's because the wife's brother was married to her.
I just remember the aunt.
Yeah.
Fans. That's the key thing. I don't really know what the actual relationship was, but
Sean Avery was the best at being best.
Dude, that would be a fun list too. Top like 25 agitators. Of all time.
Matthew Barnaby. It's kind of a shame, even though it's great that we are all seeing eye to eye pretty well on these top 5s. It probably has the least to be said, which is not. We should be really trying to stake our claim about why they fit where they. Like everyone watching this will know who these guys are. It is a matter of preference, Robbie. It is a matter of whether you value individual wins, which Broder has, but that's because he's played the most. Stepping up when the going gets tough, like Patrick Waugh has 4 cups to Broder's 3, but he has 3 Conn Smythe, which means he had his fingers in the pie. Broder never won a Conn Smythe. In fact, Jaguar, his opponent in 03, won the Conn Smythe. 2000, it was Scott Stevens. In 95, it was Claude Lemieux of all people. Whereas Waugh, the only time he didn't win the cup, or the only time he won the cup where he didn't win the Conn Smythe was Joe Sakic in 96, but he won it in 86, 93, and 01. So 3 Conn Smythes in 3 different decades. Very impressive. And then, Dominator ultimately for me gets it because of the accolades. Also his style, the flamboyance, the kind of just and sprawling out and making saves that you wouldn't even dream of doing in the driveway, with your homies. And he did it, and he played on a pretty poor Sabres team, as you said. And it wasn't until he was traded to the Red Wings in 01-02 that he really was joining the star-studded lineup. And sure enough, they win the President's Trophy in the Cup. He retires, comes back. There's a lockout, goes to the Sens, still puts up a 2.09 GAA as they win the conference, or in the regular season, they're the best record in the East. Goes back to Detroit. And even though Osgood started over in the 08 finals, he still had a 2.14 goals against average given to Jennings. And he had played the majority of the games the season prior in 06-07. And he was 40 in his early 40s then. So, it's all a matter of preference, basically. I'm glad we all see eye on number 1 and 2. Jacques Plante, I mean, honestly, part of me still wants – it's very, very nip and tuck with those 2 guys. For me, Sawchuk as a personality and Plante as a personality are 2 different things. They both go different ways. You got Plante who's knitting his toques and telling Toe Blake he can't play because of his asthma, and then innovating the mask on a permanent basis. Shout out Clint Benedict, you know what I'm saying? And then Terry Sawchuk was just like, if you watch his biopic, as shitty as it is, you kind of get an understanding for him as a character, and why that Life magazine or Time magazine picture of him with all the stitches and scars on his face that they kind of exemplified for goalies, that was him. He had a brutal life, died at 40, in the internal injuries he suffered wrestling a teammate when he removed his gallbladder, had a pulmonary embolism in the hospital, and died at age 40. Only goalie to have the 3-year waiting period waived. I know it's a tragic circumstance, but Terry Sawchuk is that guy. And I personally think from 1950 to 1955, those statistics he put up, no matter what era it is, some of the most impressive in hockey history. And he won 3 Vezinas there and 3 cups in that span. And there's so many different what ifs of those 2 guys, Plante and Sawchuk, of how their careers could have transpired if things went differently. Sawchuk was traded. Sawchuk played on 5 different teams. Plante played on 5 different teams as well in the NHL. They kind of were both kicked around and expendable down the stretch, but Plante probably ended on better terms, even though he died of terminal stomach cancer when he was in his late 50s. So tragic heroes our original 6 goalies were. And there's no losers here, definitely. Anyone who made our top 25 list except Pekka Rinne and Felix Potvin are 2 winners.
Felix Potvin, I agree with.
He's coming around on Chris Osgood. That's all I learned from that sentence. He's coming around on Chris Osgood.
It's crazy. Got all these guys from the 1920s in here, but you show no love to Pekka Rinne.
His name's Pekka.
That's a great name. That's a strong Finnish name, damn it. It's a strong Finnish name. Well, there we have it, gents. Do you guys have any final thoughts on the list? Anyone that kind of just missed the cut that you wanted to point out? Any harsh criticism for anyone else's list?
Well, I'll say, I appreciate the banter we had. Yeah, sorry to cut you off, Derek. I do want to apologize in case, I know we're all just boys being boys. Not that this is because you guys are very avid hockey historians. And it's all just for the love, as you said in the first episode, let's all just love one another. And I appreciate hearing the stories about who were your inspirations as goalies, such as Potvin. It's great to hear that. I didn't realize he was one of your favorites. It's fantastic. And you guys justified it pretty well. So it was nice to actually do this and not come away with any hard feelings, I hope. That being said,
I'm still mad Potvin's not on either one of your lists. I think that's a disgrace. But that's besides the point. I do kind of think in kind of doing it, I think it'd be interesting to ask, talk to other hockey fans or people that have a passion for the history of hockey. But I think if you were to talk to most people and you were asked them name your top 6 greatest goalies ever, I feel like the names that'll come up are going to be Hasek, Wall, Plante, Brodeur, Sawchuk, Hall. Just
Yeah.
kind of as we kind of illustrated, we maybe we, I think it's kind of funny that I think when we started doing this list and comparing it, it was like our like 20 to 25 was pretty different. Our even 16 to 20 was pretty different. But once we started to get into the top tens, it started kind of all sort of blending together, even though we made these lists completely separately. And I think it just kind of shows that like why these guys are also guys like Hasek, Plante, Brodeur, Sawchuk, Hall, why they are considered, just because they're widely considered some of the best of all time, and rightfully so. And it showed here because there's obviously Robbie's thinking like, why is Clint Benedict anywhere near this list? You guys are going, like, why is Beda kind of like Pecorine? Okay, sure, I guess. But, there's all those differences. But when we actually got into the top 10, there was very little debate. It was just kind of a matter of where you think guys slot in that top 10. But especially when we got to the top 6, our top 6 is the exact same. Just a matter of what order we put them in.
Yeah, I kind of liked how we have like our far contrast of each side. Like I'm very much favored towards the present day guys. Beta has his preference towards the guys back from the Dawn Ages, and then Derek kind of fits into the middle. So I'm glad we got kind of the extremes, and not really even the extremes, but the opinions of each side there. Anything you guys want to add before we close it out?
Well, yeah, it is good that we all do favor our different eras. Like I like seeing where we come from, and Derek likes to see how it progressed, and you like to see where it is now and where it's going to go. So that we did hit all facets here. If I don't really have anything else to add, but of course, a couple people did just miss the cut, and it's no disrespect to them that they just got bumped outside the top 25. But a couple of you guys did mention guys like Rogie Vachon just missed it for me. The namesake of the trophy, George Vezina, of course, missed it for me as well. My 26, who just missed the cut, shout out to Lauren Chabot, RIP. Lauren Chabot, very tragic death, bedridden. His kidneys to shut down, but 2.08 career goals against average, one of the best. Played in the 2 longest games of all time, came away the winner in one. He just missed my cut in lieu of Gump Worsley. So another old guy that Robbie despises.
Lauren Chabot, goals against average adjusted, 2.79.
Means nothing. He's only 600th worth than Sawchuk.
Oh my goodness gracious!
All right, Robbie, who did you just leave off? Who just missed your cut?
So just missed it. I had Mike Vernon just missing it. This shouldn't be really surprised. Like I have a lot of recent guys like Nabokov just kind of missed. Joseph just missed it for me. He was probably 26. But yeah, even Lumley. I had Bobrovsky in consideration for a little bit, but I was like, no, he just doesn't have enough of anything.
Adjusted goals against average for Bobrovsky, 1930, 6.2. He had to leave the game after taking a shot to the shoulder.
But no, yeah, I was very much leaning towards today's edge. There's one guy like who really like Jerry Cheevers. I had in there for a little bit, and then like as I started to fill everything out, I was just like, no, I just can't keep him in. And
I think Jerry Cheevers was a good goalie, but I think at the end of the day, the most famous thing he's known for is just the mask.
Exactly, yeah. So that's
and like not that he like I'm not debating his place in the Hall of Fame or anything, but it was just like that's kind of especially I think part of it though is that he made the jump to the WHA, and the WHA is kind of as interesting as a time as that was. I feel like that's kind of like a bit of a forgotten-ish realm of hockey, a little bit, but.
But how about you? Who just missed it for you?
I had Harry Lumley, Gump Worsley, Alex Connell, Clint Benedict, Marc-Andre Fleury, and John Van Beesbrook were kind of like my next guys up there. And then they all just kind of missed. I think I was gonna say I think Beda, you had like Lumley and Worsley around your like 25-ish area or whatever. So I don't think we were necessarily too far off on that. I had Roy Waters as well, kind of up there. Shrimp
Had about
Waters,
28 actually. Yeah.
28. Yeah, so
Derek,
he was.
the
Yeah,
shortest
so
player to
I had
ever
him
play.
kind of in there again, like, and I think another one of those guys where it's like I think I probably think more highly of him because he has a Vezina trophy, or not a Vezina trophy, a Hart trophy, and so that kind of elevates that status. Guys like Jose Theodore probably didn't get the consideration of the top 25, but a Hart trophy for a goalie is still a cool feat, and I feel like those things kind of need to be somewhat respected as he is. But I think did you place him at 60 on purpose because he wore 60? Because I kind of would have done that if he's near like the end of the list there.
No, I mean, when I first wanted to do the list, I thought about just doing top 50, but then there's a couple guys in the low 50s that I'm like, oh, but I do want to write about them a little bit. So I'll bump it up to 60 and that way. Whoa, can you guys see the moon? That's insane. Full blood moon right now, eh?
I live in a basement.
But I just bumped it
Blinds
to
are
60
closed.
so I can do it in 4 parts and like, this will divide it up quarterly by 15. And I don't know, I felt I was doing some guys dirty, like guys that I wanted to write about. Like Nabokov was 51. I'm like, he needs to be given some love here. Theodore, that was just a freak coincidence that he ended up being, because on my list, like I could send it to all these guys that I had, like that just missed the cut.
Well, beautiful, gents. This was a great time. You can find us at laymansports.com and at Layman Sports on Twitter and Facebook. Where can we find you, fine gentlemen?
I am at Bressette the Jet on Twitter and Instagram. Bressette has 2 S's and 2 T's in it.
I'm at Michael Beda on Twitter and Instagram. Just straight no underscores, no capitals, just my name.
As for myself, you can follow me at ReallyRobbieC on both Instagram and Twitter. You can find Classic Puck Reviews on YouTube, SoundCloud, and Google Play, as well as our very own laymansports.com. For Beda, Derek, and for me, Robbie, thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.